Honourable members, I now put the question, which is that pursuant to the provision of section 15(1)(a)(2) of the Parliamentary Powers and Privileges Act 2017 and Standing Order 175(3), this House approves the appointment of the following members to the Powers and Privileges Committee, in addition to the one specified under paragraph 1(a)(1) of the said Act. The Honourable Joseph Lekuton, CBS MP, the Honourable Farah Maalim, EGH MP, the Honourable Festus Mwangi Kinjuri, EGH MP, the Honourable Samuel Moroto Chumel MP, the Honourable Edward Wakili Muriu MP, the Honourable Samuel Gonzirai MP, the Honourable Fabian Chule Muli MP, the Honourable Jane Wanjiru Njeri Kihara MP, the Honourable John Philip Gishohi Gagusha MP, the Honourable Mishi Juma Hamisi Mbogo, CBS MP, the Honourable Jess Kanduku Kiko Mbalu, CBS MP, the Honourable Rose Museo Mumo MP, the Honourable James Onyango Koyo MP, and the Honourable John Okano Bwiro MP. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Will those of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next. Order.
Order number 12, motion, appointment of members to the Committee on Members' Services and Facilities.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, I beg to move that pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 175(3) and 212(b), this House approves the appointment of the following members to the Committee on Members' Services and Facilities. 1, the Honourable Stephen Washira Karani MP. 2, the Honourable Faisal Abdallah Bader Salim MP. 3, the Honourable Owen Yabaya, CBS MP. 4, the Honourable Kano Retired Dido Ali Raso MP. 5, the Honourable Peter Lochakapong MP. 6, the Honourable Brighton Leonard Yegon MP. 7, the Honourable Anne Wanjiko Mugo Muratha MP. 8, the Honourable Charity Kadhambi Chepkwenyi MP. 9, the Honourable Jerusha Momanyi Mongina MP. 10, the Honourable Odhiambo Elisha Ochieng MP. 11, the Honourable Ruth Adhiambo Odinga Busia MP. 12, the Honourable Robert Ngui Basil MP. 13, the Honourable Beatrice Kadeveresia Elachi, CBS MP. 14, the Honourable Paul Abur MP. And 15, the Honourable Elsie Busihile Muhanda MP. Honourable Speaker, by and large, this committee, again being a sessional committee, we endeavour to maintain the same membership for purposes of institutional memory. And because this committee has done a commendable job, Honourable Speaker, you know, also as the chair of the Parliamentary Service Commission, this is a committee that oversights your commission. And they have done a commendable job in the oversight of the commission. We have seen tremendous progress with the Bunge Towers completion, and we must commend both you as the chair of the Parliamentary Service Commission, the Parliamentary Service Commission, and the meaningful oversight that has been offered by this committee under the able leadership of Dr. Washira and Honourable Faisal. And I want to urge all members of this committee to continue the good work they are doing in ensuring that members are comfortable as they carry on with their work as members. Honourable Speaker, allow me also, as I conclude, to inform the House, Honourable Speaker, what we indicated in the House Business Committee. And it is important that we get everybody's attention, including the member for Aldai, the Honourable Miriam Keitani, and the member for Manyata, the Honourable Mukunji, who are making noise behind me and making it impossible for me to say what I am saying. That, Honourable Speaker, we have indicated that immediately after the short recess, the Selections Committee shall be sitting to re-evaluate the performance of members in committees. And I say re-evaluate because an evaluation process will mean not just attendance, but how actively you participate in committee sittings. Two, Honorable Speaker, we have also purposed as leadership to also look at members' attendance in the chamber. Because we have a challenge, Honorable Speaker, many a times having the Speaker to sit on his seat and wait for members for 10 minutes to find their way to the chamber at 2:30. Yet we all know that the House begins at 2:30 p.m. Therefore, your participation in the chamber, your participation in committees, and how actively you participate in committees, because chairs have also indicated that there are members who appear in committees, sign, and exit. That is not participation. That is attendance. Therefore, we are evaluating your active participation in committees as we, since we are almost mid-term now, we evaluate who is keen on participating in the committee that they were nominated to participate in. And I know many of us, when this House began last year, many people came to us and to the leadership asking to be placed in the Budget and Appropriations Committee, in the Finance Committee, in the Roads Committee, in the Members' Welfare Committee. But then a year down the line, you have attended only 3 meetings of that committee. Yet there are members who have no opportunity to serve in that particular committee, but they would use that opportunity and be active in the engagements of the particular committee that you are not attending. Therefore, just to give notice to members that it will not be business as usual. We have agreed within the liaison committee, chairs will share with their leadership, with their whips, the members that they have particular problems with in terms of active participation in committees. And we'll be asking you that immediately after the recess, you also do agree with us that we enhance the efficiency of the House in processing business by having members who are really keen on attendance of committee meetings and also participation in the House. With those many remarks, Honorable Speaker, I beg to move and request the Honorable Junet Mohammed once again, since he was very active in the Committee on Selections and also as whip in the minority, to second.
Honorable Junet.
Mr. Speaker, stand to second. Having second, Mr. Speaker, seconded. Mr. Speaker, this Committee of Members' Welfare and Facilities, it's a very, very important committee, Mr. Speaker, in this House. And many members don't want to be members of this committee. They think this committee is just about mandasi and tea. This is one of the most, because this is the committee that makes sure we have good facilities in this parliament. This is the committee that makes sure that we have good tea, good mandasi, everything, and this place is hospitable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last week, there is a member who came to my office, Honorable Ponabur, and he is in this committee. And Mr. Speaker was shedding tears, saying, how can I be in members' welfare and facilities only? And then we have to give him now a departmental committee. Mr. Speaker, members underrate this committee. I remember in the last two parliaments, that 11th and 12th parliament, Honorable Jacobi Bidiwo used to be only in this committee. He used to say he wants to serve only in the members' welfare and facilities. In the last parliament, Mr. Speaker, some of the distinguished members who serve this committee is none other than the majority leader, Honorable Ishungwa. And I remember when the names were being passed on the floor here, I told him, Ishungwa, from today, if my tea is not very good, you are in trouble. And he took the task very well, and we had good tea. Because, Mr. Speaker, members spend a lot of time outside their homes in parliament. They spend here almost 12 hours, 13 hours in a day, working. So, Mr. Speaker, this committee should also do a good job. They should make sure that we live in a good environment, we stay in good environment, and they must make sure that lunch is served on time, tea is served on time, and everything is on time. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I second.
Thank you, Honorable Junet. Honorable members, I now propose the question, which is that pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 175.3 and 212B, This House approves the appointment of the following members to the Committee on Welfare, on Member Services and Facilities. The Honorable Stephen Wachira Karani MP, the Honorable Faisal Abdallah Badar Salim MP, the Honorable Owen Ya Mbaya CBS MP, the Honorable Kano retired Dido Ali Raso MP, the Honorable Peter Lochakapong MP, the Honorable Brighton Leonard Yegon MP, the Honorable Anne Wanjiku Mugo Mratha MP, the Honorable Charity Kadhambi Chepkwony MP, the Honorable Jerusha Momanyi Mongina MP, the Honorable Odhiambo Elisha Ocheng MP, the Honorable Ruth Adhiambo Odinga Busia MP, the Honorable Robert Ngui Basil MP, the Honorable Beatrice Kadeveresia Elachi CBS MP, the Honorable Paul Abor MP, the Honorable Elsie Busihile Muhanda MP. Report the question. Honorable member standing, can you take your seat? Yes, Honorable Kajwang.
Mr. Speaker, this is a very special committee to all of us. It is the reason I am alive today. If there was somebody minded that I should leave Ruaraka, very little of Valium would get me out of this place. Is it possible, Mr. Speaker, for you to use standing order number 1 and make these people stand up if they are here in the chamber so that we know them very well? Because there is no other committee that is more important than this committee in the life of a member in this House. If they are in the House, Mr. Speaker, would I be asking too much if you ask them to rise so that we see them in their places?
Or we meet at our usual place.
Because some of them we don't meet in our usual places, so we are hardly, we have not familiarized each other in those places.
I presume to know your colleagues.
Yes. We don't see them there.
Oh, the honorable members, I'll now put the question. Honorable Kajwang, you have a duty to know your colleagues. And more so, those of a committee that you describe as the lifeline of your being here. Honorable members, I now put the question, which is that pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 175.3 and 21B, this House approves the appointment of the following members to the Committee of Member Services and Facilities. The Honorable Stephen Wachira Karani MP, the Honorable Faisal Abdallah Badar Salim MP, the Honorable Owen Mbaya CBS MP, the Honorable Kano retired Dido Ali Raso MP, the Honorable Peter Lochakapong MP, the Honorable Brighton Leonard Yegon MP, the Honorable Anne Wanjiku Mugo Mratha MP, the Honorable Charity Kadhambi Chepkwony MP, the Honorable Jerusha Momanyi Mongina MP, the Honorable Odhiambo Elisha Ocheng MP, the Honorable Ruth Adhiambo Odinga Busia MP, the Honorable Robert Ngui Basil MP, the Honorable Beatrice Kadeveresia Elachi CBS MP, the Honorable Paul Abor MP, and the Honorable Elsie Busihile Muhanda MP. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Will those of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it.
Order number 13, motion, changes to committee membership.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that further to the resolution of the House on Thursday, 27th October 2022, appointing members into various committees and pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 173, this House approves the appointment of Honorable Paul Abor MP to replace the Honorable Peter Kalerwa Salasia MP in the Departmental Committee of Regional Development. Honorable Speaker, I beg to ask the Deputy Whip of the minority, the Honorable Mwenje, to second.
Mwenje.
And I beg to move.
Mwenje.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to second. Thank you.
Honorable members, I now propose the question, which is that further to the resolution of the House of Tuesday, 27th October 2022, appointing members into the various committees and pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 173, this House further approves the appointment of Honorable Paul Abor MP to replace the Honorable Peter Kalerwa Salasia MP in the Departmental Committee of Regional Development. You put the question? Honorable members, I now put the question at Order 13, which is that further to the provisions of the House of Thursday, 27th October 2022, appointing members into various committees and pursuant to the provisions of Standing Order 173, this House further approves the appointment of Honorable Paul Abor MP to replace the Honorable Peter Kalerwa Salasia MP in the Departmental Committee of Regional Development. As members of that opinion say aye. Will those of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next.
Order number 14, motion, report on the consideration of the 2024 medium-term debt management strategy.
Chairperson, Public Debt and Privatization Committee. Shuria.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that this House adopts the report of the Public Debt and Privatization Committee on its consideration of the 2024 medium-term debt management strategy, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, 29th February 2024, and pursuant to the provisions of Section 15(4) of the Public Finance Management Act 2012 and Standing Order 232A 7 and 8. A, approves the 2024 medium-term debt management strategy, and B, makes the policy and financial resolutions contained in the schedule to the order paper. Honorable Speaker, this is the second report of the medium-term debt management strategy to be considered by the Public Debt and Privatization Committee in the 13th Parliament. I want to take this opportunity to sincerely thank the members of the committee who have diligently worked to ensure this report is tabled in this House. Honorable Speaker, the MTDS delineates the strategies and the initiatives to be implemented by the National Treasury in financing the fiscal deficit projected for the financial year 24-25, that is projected to amount to Kenya shillings 703 billion or 3.9% of the GDP. Honorable Speaker, the 2024 MTDS has evaluated 4 alternative funding strategies and their impact on the inherent costs and risk associated with the current public debt portfolio. It is therefore recommends a borrowing strategy to finance the fiscal deficit for the financial year 24-25, comprising of net borrowing ratio of 45:55 for net domestic borrowing and to net external borrowing, respectively. Honorable Speaker, the proposed strategy aims to maximize concessional borrowing for the external financing while minimizing commercial borrowing, thereby mitigating the cost of debt. On the domestic front, the strategy aims to reduce the refinancing risk by increasing the issuance of medium to long-term bonds. Adherence to this strategy will be a key factor in achieving public debt sustainability. Honorable Speaker, public and publicly guaranteed debt stood at Kenya shillings 11.25 trillion as of January 2024, comprising Kenya shillings 5 trillion in domestic debt and Kenya shillings 6.19 trillion in external debt. This represents 69.7% of the GDP in nominal terms. Honorable Speaker, Kenya's debt indicator, as set under the PFM Act 2012, was adjusted in November 2023 to a debt anchor of a threshold of 55% plus 5, which is to be achieved by 2028. It is projected that Kenya's public debt stock will reach 62.7% and 67.2% in 2024. The subsequent downward movement to 55% is premised on the implementation of the fiscal consolidation plan as indicated by the fiscal path and economic growth. In this regard, we argue discipline and commitment to this path. Honorable Speaker, as we move into the financial year, we should understand that the current debt stock is characterized by elevated costs and risk factors, evident through rising weighted average interest rates, heightened refinancing pressure, and exposure to real exchange rate risks. Consequently, this indicates an overall hardening of borrowing terms that amplifies the cost of sustaining fiscal deficit compared to previous fiscal years. Honorable Speaker, public debt continues to be a significant driver of expenses. It is subsequently crowding out development expenditure. Honorable Speaker, it's noteworthy that the rising proportion of interest servicing expenditures as a share of GDP has increased from 3% to 5.5% over the past decade and could have had a crowding out effect on development expenditure, which declined from 10.3% to 4.4% over the same period. There is need to reverse this trend. Honorable Speaker, the interest rate risk, as indicated by movement by the weighted average interest rates of the total debt portfolio, stood at 7.7% as of June 2023, following a general increase in the interest rates observed for both external and domestic loans over the past year. Furthermore, the share of debt on fixed interest rates declined, while the share of exposed to variable rates increased. This therefore indicated an increase in the interest cost of the debt stock in the coming year. Honorable Speaker, on refinancing risk, it is noted that between December 22 and June 2023, the average time to maturity of the stock of debt decreased, while the percentage of total debt maturing within 1 year increased slightly. This indicates an increase in refinancing pressure and calls for proper implementation of the liability and cash management to minimize the impact of implementation of the budget. Honorable Speaker, there is the matter of exchange rate risk, which refers to the vulnerability of the public debt portfolio to exchange rate volatility. A review of the valuation effect following the depreciation of the Kenya shilling against the US dollar and the euro, which jointly account for 88% of the denomination of the debt stock, resulted in an increase of debt stock by over Kenya shillings 800 billion in the debt stock. Honorable Speaker, given these circumstances, conventional debt management policies may prove inadequate in addressing the challenges faced by the country, such as the accumulation of undisbursed loans that necessitate annual payment of commitment fees, possible inefficiency in utilizing borrowed resources, and a growing level of contingent liabilities. Therefore, heightened vigilance in debt management and adherence to the fiscal consolidation measures is imperative. Honorable Speaker, after the deliberation and consideration of the contributions by various stakeholders, the committee gives the following non-financial proposals. One, that in the next medium-term expenditure framework cycle, the National Treasury ensures consistency between the medium-term debt management strategy and the budget policy statement regarding the optimal borrowing strategy and the fiscal consolidation path. Two, that the National Treasury ensures that the fiscal deficit and subsequent public borrowing projections are realistic by incorporating forecasts on any potential in-year changes to interest rates, exchange rates, and contingency spending. Three, that to address the emerging escalation of domestic interest rates alongside domestic interest payments, within 60 days of the adoption of the report, the National Treasury submits a report to the National Assembly providing practical measures to reduce the domestic debt service burden to sustainable levels. Four, that in line with the resolution of the National Assembly on the 2023 medium-term debt management strategy, the National Treasury publishes guidelines that will ensure that the Treasury single account is established and operationalized by July 1st, 2024. Honorable Speaker, five, that within 30 days of the adoption of the report, and subject to Section 50 of the Public Finance Management Act 2012, amended in 2023, the National Treasury submits a comprehensive report to the National Assembly on the breach of the debt anchor of 55% plus 5 of GDP and the remedial measures undertaken to ensure adherence to the debt threshold. 6, that in order to promote fiscal sustainability, reduce debt distress, and to slow debt accumulation, any deviation from the medium-term fiscal deficit path designed by both the budget policy statement and the MTDS, and any resultant readjustment to loan financing should be pre-approved by the National Assembly. 7, that the National Treasury ensures customization of the MTDS for the next MTF cycle to Kenya's specific debt challenges by providing specific measures to deal with undisbursed loans and related commitment fees, measures to resolve risks emanating from non-performing loans owed by state-owned enterprises, and estimation of contingent liabilities. 8, that in order to help enhance public participation in public debt matters, the National Treasury publishes simplified, citizen-friendly documents to accompany the technical reports on public debt submitted to the National Assembly. And 9, that at least 2 months before the end of the current financial year, the National Treasury submits to the National Assembly A, the annual borrowing plan that addresses any deviation from the 2024 MTDS in financing the financial year 24-25 budget estimates, attendant costs, and risks of the deviations, and policy measures to address them, and B, a schedule of all projects for which borrowing is to be undertaken for the financial year 24-25. Honorable Speaker, the committee also makes the following financial recommendation. 1, that the fiscal deficit target for the medium term is approved and set at 3.9% of the GDP for the financial year 24-25, 3.3% of the GDP for the financial year 25-26, and 3.3% of the GDP for the financial year 26-27, in line with the fiscal consolidation path. And 2, that the country's borrowing strategy is approved at 55% for net external borrowing and 45% for net domestic borrowing, as contained in the 2024 medium-term debt strategy. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move and request Honorable Makali Mulu, the Vice Chair of the committee, to second. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Who is seconding you? Makali Mulu. Honorable Makali Mulu, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I want to start by thanking my chairperson for moving this important motion. And before I get to the body of the report, Honorable Speaker, I want to make some opening remarks, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, first I want to thank you, your office and the office of the clerk, for allowing us as a committee this time to present this report to the House before the chair budget presents the budget policy statement. This is very critical, Honorable Speaker, because whatever budget deficit we are going to agree, Honorable Speaker, should inform the budget policy statement, so that as a House, we are seen to be aligned. This is the two committees, the Committee on Budget and the Committee on Public Debt and Privatization. The other important issue, Honorable Speaker, is just to remind honorable members that the reason why we are discussing public debt as a country is because we are spending more than we are collecting. If you look at our revenue, the amount we are collecting as a country, and the amounts we are spending as a country, Honorable Speaker, you realize that the issue of public debt becomes a very critical issue in this country. Just want to give an example, Honorable Speaker. If you look at the current financial year, there was a projection to collect about 2.5 trillion, Honorable Speaker, and this year now, the coming year, we are projected to collect about 2.9. That is ordinary revenue, Honorable Speaker. And if you look at that figure, Honorable Speaker, if you compare where we are today and the projections, you realize that, Honorable Speaker, we are short of the projections by about 300 billion currently, which means if the trend remains, by the end of the year, Honorable Speaker, we will have not achieved our projected revenue. And what does that do? It increases our deficit. So it means even the projection for the next financial year, Honorable Speaker, which is 2.9, will be starting with a negative of 300 billion, assuming this year's projection becomes the base year. And I think, Honorable Speaker, the issue of projection of revenue, we need to be more realistic as a country, and we need to be more thorough when it comes to the assumptions which have been made to determine our revenue projections. The other important point, Honorable Speaker, is the issue of expenditure. We have said many times, Honorable Speaker, as a country, we need to look at the expenditure side of the equation, because the more you spend, the more you increase the budget deficit. So we need to be sure as a country that we focus on what I will call core expenditure items, Honorable Speaker. So that when we spend, we must look at the items which we're supposed to spend on and make sure that they are items which are going to generate more revenue for this country so that we grow the economy. Now, Honorable Speaker, this year, we have done a projection of 3.9 budget deficit. And in total amounts, Honorable Speaker, we project to borrow about 703 billion as a country, Honorable Speaker. Now, when you look at these figures, Honorable Speaker, one of the things as a House we need to question ourselves on is whether the amount we are approving today or tomorrow, Honorable Speaker, of 3.9 will remain throughout the year. Honorable Speaker, experience and practice has confirmed to us that there is what we call in-year deviations. For example, this year, Honorable Speaker, this House approved a budget deficit of 4.4%. As at now, it has been adjusted upwards, Honorable Speaker, to 5.5%. And the question is, in the process of this adjustment, even though it can be justified, but was this House involved in making that decision? And I think, Honorable Speaker, if we have to be effective as a House, because you have a Committee on Public Debt, it is important that where we realize in-year deviations, then these deviations, Honorable Speaker, are also discussed by the House and approved. The other matter, Honorable Speaker, in the process of discussing this thing, just a few things I want to note. The issue of average interest rates has been an issue. They have increased, leading to more, in terms of total amounts for loans increasing. The issue of average maturity to average time to maturity of loans, Honorable Speaker, is getting shorter, making it worse for us. The issue of exchange rate, Honorable Speaker, is another issue we can't ignore as we discuss public debt matters. The other important issue, Honorable Speaker, is we approved a debt anchor of 55%, and we said we need to see it going down. At that time, it was 63. Now it has gone to 69 of the GDP. Instead of decreasing, it is increasing. We need an explanation as a House as to why, instead of decreasing, the figure is increasing. We don't have that explanation, Honorable Speaker. As our
Order, honorable members. I now propose the question at order number 14, that this House adopts the report of the Public Debt and Privatization Committee on its consideration of the 2024 medium-term debt management strategy laid on the table of the House on Thursday, 29th February 2024, and pursuant to the provision of Section 15(4) of the Public Finance Management Act 2012 and Standing Order 232A 7 and 8. A, approves the 2024 medium-term debt management strategy, and B, makes the policy and financial resolutions contained in the schedule to the order paper. Before I give the contributors, allow me to acknowledge the following schools in the public and speakers gallery. In the speakers gallery, we have Moi Girls School, Nairobi, Kibra, in Nairobi County. And in the public gallery, we have St. Francis Secondary School, Subukia, Nakuru County. On your behalf and on my own behalf, I welcome the students and their teachers to the House of Parliament. Now, honorable members, I see the screen is full. I believe you have logged in on this. Julius Melly. Majority, you want to be the first to go? Okay.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. And Honorable Speaker, I rise to support and allow me, Honorable Speaker, to first begin
And
by
remember, those who are contributing to this, in a procedural motion on limitation of debate, time is 5 minutes for each and every contributor, including the majority leader.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. And I hope the clerk has noted you took about 30 seconds of the 5 minutes. Honorable Speaker, I was thanking the chair of the committee and members of the committee, led by Honorable Makali Mulu, who is a very diligent member of this committee and the chair. Honorable Speaker, I rise to support this report. And many of the recommendations, Honorable Speaker, especially regarding our fiscal consolidation process, from the 3.9 that is envisaged in the next financial year, 24-25, to the 3.3 in the medium term, the 2 years following the next financial year, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, as we speak about fiscal consolidation, the fiscal consolidation program, Honorable Speaker, will encompass two aspects of it, both revenue generation, and that I'm sure the Finance Committee will later in the year be bringing their Finance Bill 2025 that will deal with matters to do with revenue generation. But more importantly, Honorable Speaker, is on expenditure and how we are able to rationalize our expenditure as a country. And this is where we've had a huge challenge. And if you listen to what the Honorable Makali Mulu was saying, the media changes usually emanate from reviews of our expenditure, Honorable Speaker, where every supplementary budget comes with additional expenditure at the time when revenues are also not growing, but revenues are going down. And I do hope, Honorable Speaker, that the National Treasury this time round will adhere to what the committee and the House is recommending should we adopt this report as it is and the recommendations of the committee as they are. That, Honorable Speaker, if the National Treasury discovers within the year that our revenues are either not performing or improving, then it is imperative that they also review the expenditure side of our budget, because that is a challenge we've had. And the Honorable Dindi Nyoro, our chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, I know has been very keen on this, but I want to ask him that this year we must actualize what we say as a House. That because the National Treasury, and indeed not the National Treasury, I heard somebody say the other day that even our counties have borrowed from their big brother in the national government. We are seeing county government also doing budgets based on projected revenues that are never realizable. In my own county, Honorable Speaker, half year, I think we are at 1 point something billion shillings against a projection of 8 billion shillings, 7.98 billion shillings. And it's impossible in the next half year or 4 or 5 months to the end of the financial year to achieve the revenue targets that they had. And the same happens, Honorable Speaker, for our national government. And therefore, it's imperative that the National Treasury, when they realize KRA is not up to speed in terms of the revenue that they had projected, they review expenditure downwards. Probably, Honorable Speaker, it is time, and the Budget and Appropriations Committee has food for thought on whether do we put an embargo on new expenditure. And I know this has been there, but we need to make sure that additional capital expenditure is checked. Honorable Speaker, the other thing that we must check is our recurrent expenditure. Honorable Speaker, I am seeing in the newspapers advertisements for jobs every now and then in the public service, and many of them may not necessarily be replacements of people who have left their offices, Honorable Speaker. And this, at the end of the day, will lead to very huge recurrent expenditure that will negate the fiscal consolidation that we are trying to pursue. Honorable Speaker, as I conclude, let me say that the National Treasury, as I said, must ensure that fiscal consolidation is not just a term that exists in our books and in these reports, that it is something that they must actualize this time round, Honorable Speaker. And with that, I beg to support.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to also contribute to this debate. Mr. Speaker, two things come to mind on this issue of our debt strategy. First, I think we must be very, very careful as members of parliament before we vote, what exactly we are voting for. Because this is the beginning of the budget cycle, and if we are not clear about what is happening, we may just agree to things and later on we start complaining. So we must note as members, this is the beginning of the budget cycle, the debt strategy is part of it, and we must be careful what we vote for. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, we also must be careful as politicians what we say, even when it is during campaign time. Because, Mr. Speaker, there are things that we have to do eventually, and sometimes it is very, very humiliating and humbling for people to eat humble pie. Because, Mr. Speaker, you note that when we passed the last finance bill, there are some parts of that finance bill that later on members who had accepted them went out there and started complaining publicly. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, when you look at this strategy, it actually, passing this enables and allows the government of Kenya Kwanza to borrow more. And you must remember the promises that were made during the campaign trail. We were told that borrowing, in fact, they demonized the previous head of state, and apparently borrowing was supposedly a very bad thing. And now we are continuing to borrow. We are planning to borrow. We are setting up ourselves to borrow some more money. Mr. Speaker, it is, in fact, I can say that this regime can teach a lot to the previous regime on borrowing, because they are now going further into using other marketing instruments like green and blue bonds, samurai bonds, panda bonds, sukuk bonds, among others. So basically, there is a better and more intention of borrowing from this strategy. But Mr. Speaker, borrowing is not necessarily a bad thing, because even in our own investments, we borrow so that we can do good things with that money. What matters is what exactly do you use the money for? Exactly how do you spend that money? If you borrow and put up an investment that returns, it gives you good returns, then it's a good investment. But Mr. Speaker, if you borrow and consume and use that money for normal day-to-day operations, then that becomes a problem. Mr. Speaker, it's also a problem, and this is what is happening. When you borrow to pay back loans, Mr. Speaker, it is not a good strategy to borrow so you can pay back loans. And unfortunately, I am seeing a tendency where the current borrowing is at a much higher cost than the previous borrowing. So you're borrowing so you can settle loans that were borrowed at lower interest rates, and you are paying higher interest rates based on the plan that is there now. Mr. Speaker, we have to be careful about these things. But Mr. Speaker, I also think it's unfortunate that there is a lot of borrowing from the local market. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that the former president, the late President Kibaki did, is that he stopped borrowing from the local market. Mr. Speaker, immediately that happened, it opened up and stopped crowding out the private sector. So people with businesses were able to take loans from banks. In fact, before Kibaki, even opening accounts with some of these banks, some of these major banks, was almost impossible, because even the minimum deposits were so high, because they were dealing directly with the government. So, Mr. Speaker, it is actually something that we need to look at. Why allow ourselves, our government, to borrow from the local market and crowd out the private sector? Mr. Speaker, I also want to point out that Treasury, Mr. Speaker, is not taking this house seriously. And Mr. Speaker, you are aware that several times Treasury has told this house that they will release funds for GAF, for GCDF, and they didn't honor it, I think about 4 times. Mr. Speaker, I'm saying that because if you look at the policy resolutions, they actually confirm what I am saying. The policy resolution number 5 says that within 30 days of the adoption of this report and subject to Section 50 of the Public Finance Management Act, Treasury will submit a comprehensive report to the National Assembly on the breach of the debt anchor of 55% to GDP. Mr. Speaker, we are at about 70.8% to GDP. That means that when they gave an undertaking, they did not fulfill it. And now we are giving them time to go and fulfill something they didn't fulfill when they had the opportunity. Mr. Speaker, again, in the last discussions on this strategy, medium-term debt strategy, we talked about Treasury opening a single account. Mr. Speaker, we are repeating ourselves. 12 months.
Time is up. Joseph McClap. Is not there. Omboko Milemba? Yes. You are on intervention.
Oh, microphone. Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for this chance to speak on this medium-term debt management strategy. Basically, the medium-term debt management strategy and things to do with this were basically things of the IMF. And they were supposed to make the countries know how they will fix the deficits that are in their budgets. But I also believe greatly that this must be customized to different countries. In this case, it needs to be customized to Kenya so that it can work well for Kenya. In the report that we are having before us, Honorable Speaker, the deficit is likely to be above 703 billion Kenya shillings, which needs to be fixed. And this strategy helps us to see how we shall fix that deficit in the budget, and which strategies that the Treasury will use to fix this deficit. And it becomes very important to discuss this and understand as a House, and thanks to the fact that it's coming earlier than the budget itself, unlike last year when the opposite happened. It's important, Honorable Speaker, that we understand that there are also things within the system itself in Kenya that are creating more higher debt for us, and which can be fixed, and which this report has actually covered. When you look in the report itself on its own recommendations, on recommendation number 5, it talks about the adoption of single account by the Treasury. This is one area, even though, Honorable Mbui, you stopped there and looked like you are getting tired because we said this last year, we are saying it again, we have to continue saying this so that we hammer it until it's accepted that there's need for a single account at the Treasury. Because how often, Honorable Speaker, are we borrowing money when we have our own money in different banks, which is our own money? We realized during the committee sittings that there were very many case studies where the government has money or has borrowed money, and that money is deposited in banks. It stays there for more than even 5 years, and those banks still lend to the government in form of treasury bonds and treasury bills, such that the government of Kenya then ends up borrowing its own money, which it borrowed from outside at a higher interest rate, has given to a department or a ministry in this country. That money goes to a bank, and then it's again lent to the government as local borrowing form of treasury bonds and treasury bills. So it is making our borrowing even escalate for no proper reason. And therefore the need to create a single account by the Treasury, this cannot be left out. Even if we repeated it last year, we have to hammer it down so that it is done. Another case study, Honorable Speaker, which is making our borrowing to escalate are the cases of commitment fees on loans and the timelines for disbursing the loans. We also saw within the committee sittings that so many loans have been given to Kenya by several institutions, but the Treasury has not utilized those loans. Somewhat, the country still pays something called commitment fees on these loans, and these commitment fees continues to be paid year in, year out, despite the fact we have not used those loans, and that escalates our borrowing, which is not good. So I would be asking that as we go into this session, we go slow on committing ourselves to taking loans, which we are not ready to use them. As the time goes, as I conclude, I should also speak on the issue of the various loans which are with us, we have taken, but unfortunately we are not using them, and therefore they end up being expensive. Like the earlier speakers said, as we do borrow, sometimes we end up borrowing loans that are more expensive to pay cheaper loans, and that is dangerous for the deficits that we have in our budget. With those few remarks, I want to support.
The Honourable Member for Baringo North.
Honorable Joseph Makilap.
They are engaging. Madam Speaker, thank you for this opportunity. I rise to support this report of my committee. Madam Speaker, public debt has become a stigma for our country, which we need to be able to have controls so that we are able to finance programs of this country without struggling to pay debts. Madam Speaker, one thing that we've realized as a committee, which some members have raised, is that there are a lot of money that are pending in various international banks that has been paid as commitment fee to the tune of about 4 billion shillings for loans that we have not received or used. Madam Speaker, you are aware that the PFM Act is very clear that we borrow for development. And if you borrow for development, what is it expected? It's expected that you borrow, inject the money into the economy through some programs that in return will bring on revenue that can be used to finance the next programs. Madam Speaker, in absence of resources pumped into the economy in terms of programs like agriculture, like roads, that are meant to bring back revenue and generate revenue for the economy, Madam Speaker, we shall not be doing much for our country. So we support the implementation and the draft of the proposals that we as a committee have recommended to the National Treasury so that we have value for money. Could you imagine, Madam Speaker, a situation where a commitment fee to the tune of 4 billion, that is enough money to do a road from Parwesa to Koloa in my constituency that transfers about 3 or 4 constituencies in Kenya. And the money cannot be accessed because the loan has not come forward and no money has come to the economy. Secondly, Madam Speaker, is that borrowing expensive. Madam Speaker, at the moment, we need to control and have control of the interest rates. Because at the moment, if you are in the private sector, you borrow loan at 22%. This 22% has come as a result of government, borrowing. If the government borrows from commercial banks, Madam Speaker, what does that mean? It means the commercial banks will go and loan money to the government because they are offering good interest rates, and the implication is that the private people, the people who want to do business, it has become very difficult for Kenyans, individual Kenyans and commercial enterprises to borrow, private companies to borrow from the commercial banks. The consequence of that, Madam Speaker, is if citizens and business people are not able to borrow from our own institutions, Madam Speaker, it means you will not be able to collect enough taxes to run the economy because the loans are expensive. They are not able to make money out of it. So, Madam Speaker, the proposals that we brought forward to our chairman, Madam Speaker, is that, look, for example, Madam Speaker, if you borrow to refinance another loan, it becomes a problem. So there is need now to borrow and put programs on the money. If you borrow money today from an institution, then that particular program must be indicated by National Treasury that this money goes to this particular program so that we wait for an outcome. Madam Speaker, for us to be able to grow our economy, we need to actually reduce our appetite for huge fiscal debt. Madam Speaker, we have to live within our means as a country. For us to be able to continue with our programs of this country, we must live with it, reduce the fiscal debt, because that is the source. The source of public debt in Kenya is a result of high fiscal deficit of our budget. And if we have to reduce it, then we reduce the development programs so that we live as a country within our means. If we live within our means, we are able to grow our economy using our own resources. Madam Speaker, I support the proposals and recommendations that we've done, because that will put the country in order and we'll be able to have what is called a sustainable.
The Honorable Beatrice Elachi, member for Dagoretti North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker also rise to support this report, to appreciate the work that the committee has done in terms of just looking at how we are as a country and how strained we are in terms of debt, what risks we have and what we need to do. Madam Speaker, when you look at the report, you realize that the control of budget also brought in very, very serious insights that I think we need to ask ourselves a few questions, regardless of whether we will like her or not. But one thing she brings out very clearly is that there is no way as a government we can spend 4 or 5 billion on debt interest expenses, composed of domestic interest payments, worth that money, and then again we come with 300 billion, and that's foreign interest payments worth of 1 or 5 billion. And she questions us and says, if we continue with this trend, Madam Speaker, the country is going to have itself in a distress form. What we need to ask ourselves, Madam Speaker, and Parliament has been given that opportunity to indeed interrogate all these reports, to indeed interrogate the budget. But one thing we are not coming out, Madam Speaker, which this House can help the country, is how do we come out and look at different resources that we have, be it our natural resources, Madam Speaker, our minerals, and ask ourselves, is there a way we can use our minerals to ensure we pay some of these debts, Madam Speaker? Some of these debts, Madam Speaker, we pay and we find ourselves we have not even managed to use. That we are just paying interest on something because we went and we agreed we will borrow, but even the borrowing has not arrived in the country. Time has come, especially in the last administration, that was the biggest challenge, that we have borrowed money and we are unable to spend. Then now we arrive and find ourselves with very high interest, Madam Speaker. And then we come again and we start complaining, and today we are here. We have raised everything we can, Madam Speaker, but the most important thing we need to ask ourselves, in all this, how do we now rebalance ourselves and look at the different sectors that are either ailing, sectors like our different parastatals that we have, Madam Speaker. We have to ask ourselves, we have to sit down as a country and agree. It is time we agree. There's so much that we can do in national government to find ourselves with revenues that we can take over and start dealing with this risk, with the debt that we have, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the other thing, when you read the report, the Auditor General now comes in, and again, in a way of advising government, she says very clearly that the government continues to pay commitment fees incurred on undrawn amounts regarding loans signed between the government of Kenya and foreign lenders. And then, Madam Speaker, the question now comes in. If that is what is happening, how do we now sit down and renegotiate these loans? Since we have not spent, I believe we can renegotiate. I believe there is a way we can even now sit and say, we borrow where it is cheaper and repay all those loans and remain now with a loan that you can carry forward so that you don't strain the country the way we are, Madam Speaker. And so therefore, Treasury has to come and sit and ensure there are some loans. Do we need those loans? If indeed they were meant to do roads, they were meant to do, and now time has gone, and even some of these things have been overtaken by events. Do we still need the loans should be the question. And that is one thing that when we get our budgets, Madam Speaker, we are waiting to see how Treasury is now advising us. that yes, we have our budget, this is the total amount that we want to spend, but we have a framework we are bringing in on how we can relook at ourselves and work within what we have budgeted for, regardless of, I know we will say we need more money than what we want, but we are saying as a country, let us spend what we have. So, Madam Speaker, as I support this, I am waiting to see.
The Honorable Didi Nyoro.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I first of all want to thank and congratulate the Chairman, Honorable Shurie, of course with the entire committee, even with the Vice Chair, who is also a member of the Budget Committee, Honorable Dr. Makari Muru. Honorable Speaker, I'll be direct to the point because I want to highlight a few things. When we came in as Kenya Kwanza, Honorable Speaker, the President was very categorical that Kenya had to reverse the gear in terms of borrowing. And Honorable Speaker, what we are doing in the Budget Committee, alongside the Debt Committee and the Finance Committee, because we work together, is that gradually we have been able to climb down in terms of the deficit. Honorable Speaker, last financial year, Kenya had a deficit to GDP ratio of around 5.7%. Honorable Speaker, that came down around supplementary budget time. At some point we came to 4.4%, and then after the last supplementary, we came to 5.5% debt to GDP ratio. Honorable Speaker, though we'll be debating the BPS tomorrow, what we have managed to do actually for the next financial year is that the deficit has come down to from 886 billion, and we have come down to around 703.9 billion shillings, which is just around 3.9% deficit to GDP ratio, and which is a very good path, Honorable Speaker, when it comes to managing our appetite to borrow. Honorable Speaker, number two, I also want to just bring the point bare, because sometimes we read even on the newspapers on the amount of money that has been borrowed. Honorable Speaker, the truth of the matter is that Kenya never borrows monies outside of the budgeted deficit. Honorable Speaker, when we have seen an escalation of the debt portfolio, that has majorly been because our debt, which is roughly 11 trillion, 50% is debt domestic, and the other 50%, thereabout, give or take, is also foreign. 70% of our foreign debt is dollar denominated. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, what happens when the shilling has lost, let's say 20%, then you just take the 20% and roll over to our debt portfolio, which is foreign, and therefore we may see the debt increasing, for example, by 1 trillion without borrowing a shilling, because our debt figures are given in shillings, but 50% of the debt is borrowed in external currencies. Honorable Speaker, we have also seen that whereas Kenya is adopting a conservative manner and a conservative model of borrowing rates, we have also seen some of the major economies over borrowing, Honorable Speaker. Currently, the debt in the US is over 120% debt to GDP ratio of over 34 trillion shillings, which has actually also caused a standoff in the Congress in the US. And Honorable Speaker, even in the UK, the debt to GDP ratio is over 100%. But what we are saying is that we cannot compare our economy to those of the developed economies, Honorable Speaker, because our cost is different, our use is different, and that is why we will continue to borrow less, and because we cannot afford to continue digging the hole of debt. Honorable Speaker, when we talk about debt also, we look at several things. For example, when you go to Japan, Japan has a debt to GDP ratio which is highest in the world of over 250%. But Honorable Speaker, you have to look at the cost. The cost in Kenya now to borrow domestically, just recently we had an infrastructure board of over 17%, Honorable Speaker, which is tax-free. At some point in Japan, for the last 10 years, they have had boards which yield negative, which actually have a negative yield, meaning the negative interest rate. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, the more the reason We cannot compare ourselves with those. And Honorable Speaker, because of such kind of blunders, Honorable Speaker, we have been able to see, after our borrowing in Japan, this has led to deflation, and that deflation, Honorable Speaker, has led to the real GDP in Japan has remained the same for the last 30 years, Honorable Speaker, because of our borrowing and also the ramifications of our borrowing. Honorable Speaker, also, Kenya is a gross borrower and therefore does not lend to anyone. Some of these big economies, Honorable Speaker, what is reported as gross borrowing, Honorable Speaker, but they also
The Honorable Jerry Minor, member for Kirinyaga. Oh, but hold on a moment, let me welcome a school.
Thank you.
Just give me a minute to recognize the school. I wish to recognize, seated in the public gallery, 2 schools, Milimani Secondary School from Naivasha constituency, Nakuru County, and another school, Nairobi River Primary and Junior Secondary, from Embakasi West constituency, Nairobi County. And before you proceed, Honorable Maina, let me allow Honorable Mark Mwenje to welcome the team.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, let me take this opportunity to welcome the students, JSS students of Nairobi River Primary from Embakasi West. I want to thank the school for the splendid job they've been doing. Honorable Speaker, we'll be doing additional classrooms in that school, about 4 classrooms for JSS, and it's good the students are here to see this is where we get funds to build for them. So I want to encourage them, and I believe up there are future members of parliament who will come here someday. Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and on behalf of the entire House, let me welcome all the students in the galleries. Thank you.
Thank you. May I proceed, Honorable Jerry Minor?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I rise to support the report by the committee. Honorable Speaker, this House owes a fiduciary duty to the electorate. Honorable Speaker, it is therefore important to examine our medium-term debt management strategy so that we can ensure that any monies are applied accordingly. Honorable Speaker, the ideal situation is that the net external borrowing does not exceed 55% and the domestic borrowing does not exceed 45%. Honorable Speaker, we must therefore examine what are the key priority areas that need funding by this House. Honorable Speaker, we must also continue to ensure that there is a continuity in government projects. Honorable Speaker, cutting down over recurrent expenditure is also something that we should examine. Honorable Speaker, on the fiscal policy that we have must also reflect on the financial constraints of this nation. And that is what I call walking the talk. Honorable Speaker, since the Kenya Kwanza government took office, we have actually borrowed less. I want to disabuse the notion that we have borrowed more as a Kenya Kwanza government. And I want to refer to my good colleague and friend, Honorable Ndindi Nyoro, that what happens is that when the shilling depreciates, the value, and around 70% of our debt is in US dollars, obviously increases, and that is the net effect that we see in the increase of our debt. Honorable Speaker, it is not about the debt, it is about whether the debt is sustainable. Countries like the USA have a debt that is around over 128% of the GDP. As of 2023, they had more than 32 trillion US dollars in debt. Honorable Speaker, the question that we must continuously examine is whether we have a sustainable debt and whether we are able to manage the same for posterity. Honorable Speaker, the G7 nations like Canada, Germany, and the rest have net debt of around 128%, Honorable Speaker. So we must continuously engage in this conversation to ensure that we examine policies that also do not denigrate our development agenda, but ensure that for posterity we sustain the same and are able to pay our debt. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
The Honorable Donya Doris, member for Kisii.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to support this because there's a time I was board member at Wendo sugar milling. And I saw over 100 vehicles which are not used. Those are government assets. So I imagined if you moved around the country and you identified the government assets which are not being used, these assets can be sold, Madam Speaker. They make the process more quick so that these, the money that is collected from the government assets can be used to run government activities. Anytime there is borrowing, they say we have to fund such activity, we have to fund such activity, forgetting that we have our own, where we can collect this money and make it run these government projects or government activities. Another thing, Madam Speaker, each borrowing must have a purpose that is serving and an approval. If today I took some loan from any bank in Kenya, I will be given a limit on when to pay that loan and the interest and the purpose and the time that I have to pay for it. So we are never clear on what we want, but it is easy to borrow from other places than to allow a government to give a clear procedure, Madam Speaker, on how they can have its idle assets sold so that we can limit on the amount of money that we are borrowing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honorable Member for Manyata, John Gitonga.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I'll start by saying that a nation's strength ultimately consists of what it can do on its own and not what it can do, it can borrow from others. Honorable Speaker, around 13 years ago, our debt was less than 1 trillion. Honorable Speaker, right now we are talking of close to 11.25 trillion. And Honorable Speaker, we actually need to borrow less as we move forward. Because, Honorable Speaker, the population that we are leading, the next generation must not find this country in crisis, in form of debt, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I want to congratulate the report done by the Committee on Debt and say that, Honorable Speaker, we actually as a House need to be more keen on the issues of borrowing in this country, Honorable Speaker, and more keen also, Honorable Speaker, on the programs that we are borrowing to finance. And I propose, as we look at this issue of debt and how we are handling our debt, Honorable Speaker, we need to put in audit, especially well-trusted auditors, even internationally, Honorable Speaker, to check on the viability of the programs and projects that we are funding with debt. And Honorable Speaker, that will help us to be able to get value for money, because we are net borrowers. So we cannot say we will not live without borrowing. But let us borrow and ensure we maximize on the opportunities and the value for money as we continue doing the same. Honorable Speaker, I'll deviate a little bit and go back to the borrowing in Kenya right now and say that, Honorable Speaker, and call upon the Treasury to look at the interest rates that our local debts, our banks are giving to the normal business people. Honorable Speaker, right now, if you're doing business, 20% and you borrow from bank, 20% goes of your profit goes to what you are making in any business. And that means, Honorable Speaker, we are having a problem with even people financing their own operations. I call upon Treasury to check on that, and I understand the issue of inflation, but it's important to have local solution, especially for our businesses, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, we also need to review, and it's good to always say we are a working and a thinking nation. We passed the finance bill last year, And there are some things that are working, others need improvement, others need to be rethought. While we are preparing to do another budget in June and read another finance bill, Honorable Speaker, some of the taxes that we introduced, and we were very keen to increase on our collection, some of the things have not worked right. It's important we review that as a House, ensure we come up with ways of raising revenue that are not too much into killing the businesses that are being operated in this country, Honorable Speaker. I also want to say that even some of the taxes, especially the turnover tax, that we have introduced to our farmers, it is also important as a House, because we are also a thinking House, to see how we are going to reprieve that and reduce what is required for our farmers, Honorable Speaker, so that we also don't have a case where farmers are getting frustrated, going to internet and trying to solve issues, Honorable Speaker. As I close, Honorable Speaker, I want to say that we need to work on the savings that this country is accumulating. And I'm happy that the government we have today has come out strongly to see how we can improve on our savings, so that we stop borrowing too much from the foreign entities and getting crushed by paying by the dollar, and work with our Kenyan shillings. Then we can negotiate on issues of our interest rate, so that, Honorable Speaker, we can have this country figured out as we move on, Honorable Speaker. And that is my submission, as I still congratulate the committee. Thank you.
Honorable Rindikiri Mugambi. It's out of the House. The Honorable Geoffrey Ruku, MP from Bere North. Not in the House. The Honorable Dr. Robert Pukos, MP for Endebess. You want to contribute to this?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to contribute to the policy and financial resolutions relating to the 2024 medium debt management strategy. Honorable Speaker, just on the onset, this strategy talks about that at least 2 months before the end of the current financial year, the National Treasury submits to the National Assembly the annual borrowing plan that addresses any deviations from the 2024 medium-term debt strategy in financing the 2024-2025 budget estimates, attendant costs and risks of the deviations, and the policy measures to address. That in order to help the enhanced public participation in public debt matters, the National Treasury publishes simplified, citizen-friendly documents to accompany the technical reports on public debt submitted to the National Assembly. As you are aware, Honorable Speaker, many people at times they don't understand some of the technical terms used in some of these reports, and therefore it will be very important that the Treasury publishes simplified, citizen-friendly documents to accompany the technical reports on public debt submitted to the National Assembly. Honorable Speaker, we also in this report ask that the country's borrowing strategy approved at 55%, that is +5 for net external borrowing and 45% for net domestic borrowing, as contained in a 2024 medium-term debt management strategy. And we should be able to have fiscal policies that gives us some discipline, so that we don't deviate so much, Honorable Speaker. We've seen that in our use of Article 223 of to work on the expenditure by the government that was unplanned for, where we are able to spend and then be able to look at what is our collections. I think that is very important, such that we don't spend beyond what we are able to collect. We must stick within certain level of our discipline, certain fiscal policies, that we don't go beyond where we have to now come into the supplementary estimates and try to cut on our costs so that when we make our budget should be limited and within limits that we are able to collect within our expenditure. Because, Honorable Speaker, when you go even to the supermarket, you spend what you have in your pocket. You don't spend what you don't have in your account. So I think it is important for us as a country that we must have fiscal policies, fiscal discipline, that we can be able to spend within our means and not overborrow, so that we don't borrow what we are not able to service. With those few remarks, Honorable Speaker, I support.
Daniel Manduku.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the onset, let me inform the House that I'm a member of the Public Debt Committee. But even after sitting in that committee, it is my wish to see that the National Treasury adheres to their own proposal as stipulated in the medium-term debt strategy. Mr. Speaker, it's ironical that the National Treasury proposes a borrowing mix of 55 being foreign and 45 being local, and yet in the budget policy statement, what they are planning to borrow this year is 63 to 37%. Further to that, Mr. Speaker, this House some time back resolved that the debt anchor be 55%. A few months down the line, today, our debt anchor to GDP is at 69%. Would have wished to see a situation where this debt anchor gradually starts going down towards the target of 55%. The National Treasury has promised that they should achieve this anchor by June 2028. I think this House needs to sanction the National Treasury strongly so that periodically they are obligated to come and give reports on a quarterly basis. Mr. Speaker, there's also a problem with our debt in that even if it is borrowed, there's no rule or law on how it is applied in terms of development versus recurrent. Any good economist will tell you that debt should strictly be applied to development expenditure. Mr. Speaker, it is very sad to see that we've borrowed a lot of money and used it on recurrent expenditure. Maybe, going forward, we also need to redefine what is recurrent vis-a-vis what is development expenditure, with special emphasis on the development of human resources. Here, Mr. Speaker, I'm thinking about teachers, doctors, and other people who help in uplifting our social status as a country. Mr. Speaker, some members keep comparing Kenya to Japan and the US, who have exceeded 100% debt to GDP ratios. But I want to remind them that, Mr. Speaker, these countries have lots of foreign reserves running into billions and billions of dollars. And they also have monies that they've lent to countries like Kenya. And so a comparison of with such countries is not appropriate. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, in all discussions that we have about public debt, we need to seriously consider having a public debt act so that it can legislate and strictly seal any loopholes where the Public Finance Management Act does not cover. And this may reduce the abuse of using Article 223 of the Constitution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You have Honorable Edith Nyanze. So stepped out, huh? The Honorable Dr. James Nyikal, you want to contribute to this? MP for Seme.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I must appreciate what the committee has done. Mr. Speaker, this is the second time we are actually discussing the budget management strategy during the budget process. And it's actually the first time we are doing it before the budget policy strategy, which means we are actually seriously taking up the matter of looking at our debt and linking it to our budget, because because that's really where the issue lies. So, Speaker, debts on their own are not a bad thing, but what is important is what we do with the debt, and the purpose for it, and whether we achieve that, because it comes from the budget deficit, and the deficit could either be our recurrent expenditure or development. And we presume that we should say that most of the times we shouldn't borrow just for consumption to finance our recurrent expenditure, but actually for development and plan and make sure that what we spend on actually brings revenue later on. I think those are the really most important issues when we are dealing with debts. What is the source of debt? As I said earlier, basically it is a budget deficit. And it is important, and I think this report addresses it to some extent, that the budget deficit is our expenditure against our revenue. And really, if we find that we have a large budget deficit, we should now adopt the process of saying, why can't we start by actually counting the expenditure? What we do currently, that when we have a deficit, we actually go out to borrow. My view is that we should now start looking at what do we cut in our expenditure, what do we reduce in what we are going to spend. Borrowing is good, but if you are borrowing until you cannot pay back, and we have had a lot of problems in this country, the cost of living has gone up, and the big issue that's been that we are paying debts. We are paying debts, so we cannot finance our expenditure. So we must start looking at reducing our revenue. And this report, Mr. Speaker, actually has two main parts. One is a list of financial resolutions that I think are directly related to what we plan to do. That the fiscal target for medium term is approved and set at 3.9 for the year 2024 and 3.3 of the GDP for 2025 and so on. But the issue is, shall we be able to actually adhere to this? Last year, we actually were at 4%, and now we are at 5.5% of the GDP. That is our deficit. So we can put all these resolutions, but are we really going to adhere to them and make sure that we don't go beyond that? And we're also saying that the country's borrowing strategy is approved at 55% of the GDP for external borrowing and 45% for a domestic borrowing, which is a good thing. But shall we be able to stick at this? Because last time we actually put this at about 50 something, and we went up all the way to 68. So are we able to do that? Our debt to GDP, the ratio as a percentage, we also again set it at 55, and we're going to all be way beyond that. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, mine is this policy recommendations that have been here are key, and without them, the financial resolutions that we have put in that are in the report will not work. And I will just mention, just to Mr. Speaker, that we should encourage
Why are you saying okay? Are you done?
Just saying, what can I do if you have to give it 1 minute?
To wind up if I gave you 1 minute?
So we should actually encourage public participation. When as a House, we are now realizing that we have to look at budget during the budget process, the same should apply to the public so that the public will do that. We have also said in the recommendations that will bring out a schedule of what we intend to do with the budget. But I also think we should bring out a schedule of what we have done with the budget, with the debt that we took in the last budget, and what have been returns with that. I think it is only then that it will have a meaning approach to the debt management. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The MP for Kitui Rural, the Honorable David Boni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On onset, let me say I support this report and thank the committee for coming up with the second report. Mr. Speaker, let me also take this opportunity to thank Treasury on the way they handled the Eurobond, the payback. Mr. Speaker, the Eurobond is something which had brought a lot of anxiety in the financial markets. I remember last year when I was in Washington for the IMF World Bank talks. Everybody was looking at Kenya and saying Kenya is the next country to Zambia and Ghana in defaulting the loan. So at least I think now we are out of that hook. And you can see the Kenya shilling has appreciated against the dollars because a lot of people are holding dollars and thinking that at one point the government will be mopping up the dollars to pay the Eurobond. So at least the market for the dollar has stabilized. Mr. Speaker, this proposal in the medium-term debt strategy, they are not new. They have been there. But the question is, have they been implemented? And I'll tell you, when you look at the report, the 2023 set fiscal deficit was targeted at 4.4%. But what did we get? We got 5.5%, meaning that we are not following the proposals. And Mr. Speaker, we need to be serious as a country. If we have to fight the deficits, we have to fight the debts, we have to move towards balanced budgets. And I like the way the committee has recommended that that Treasury should submit to Parliament the list of projects which they are borrowing for. And I'll tell you currently, what we are borrowing for domestic, for recurrent expenditure. In fact, you move in the country, there are no major projects which are going on. And therefore, when a country starts borrowing for recurrent and not investing, we are doing very badly. So we need to move towards balanced budget. Two, there have been a lot of roadside promises. When you do a roadside promises, for example, by the head of state, that means that project you have promised, or he has promised, has to go to the budget. When it has to go to the budget, there are two things you have to do. One, you have to reorganize budgets. Two, you have to bring it supplementally. And when you bring it supplementally, you are increasing the budget deficit. Budget deficit is equal to borrowing. So this roadside promises, I think it's high time as a country we follow what we have promised and what is in the budget so that at least we can reduce the budget. Mr. Speaker, the use of Article 223 has been overused and abused. You remember the Auditor General and also the Controller Budget reporting that billions of shillings were used under Article 223. When you use that kind of money under Article 223, then you are creating a deficit. That means the project we had budgeted for, you have to borrow because you don't have money for it. And it's high time we think about reducing that. We also need to go for concession loans, which are cheaper, as opposed to commercial loans. And we need people who can negotiate loans effectively, professional negotiators. You see, the way Eurobond was negotiated, I don't think it was negotiated by professionals, because the Eurobond was supposed to be paid, the 2 billion US dollars was supposed to be paid once. But I like what he has been negotiated, the Eurobond, the payback. It is going to be paid in installment. Can you imagine now if we have to pay 300 billion in June? This country just collapse. So we need professional negotiators. And of course, I like what they have recommended. The implementation.
Honorable Mboni, what are you signaling by your hand? What are you signaling to the chair by raising your hand? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Okay. So I was saying that as a country, we cannot afford to pay 3 billion Kenya shillings. I mean, we need professional negotiators who can negotiate and we pay loans in installments. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of single treasury single account. This is something which has been proposed a long time ago, but there is a lot of resistance, either by treasury or by government agencies. Can you imagine? In fact, I was talking to somebody, and he was telling me the government agencies, parastatals, they have over 200 billion held in private banks. And the government still goes there and borrow their money, money, and pay interest on it. So treasury single account should be implemented so that all this money is marked up, put in CBK, and government can borrow when they can take the money, use it, and return when they are in a position. Lastly, borrowing in domestic loans, domestically. This one can also have private investment. Can you imagine? I was talking to somebody, and he was telling me the bonds, interest rate for the bonds is 18%. The interest rate, if you go to the bank to borrow now, the interest rate is around 20%. How many Kenyans can afford to pay to borrow at that rate? So, Mr. Speaker, I think the proposals which has been proposed should be implemented so that at least we can move forward. Thank you very much. I support.
The Honorable Tuku Kwenya, the Member of Parliament for Kinako.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to contribute to this report on medium-term debt management strategy. Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I would wish to support this our own report. I am a member of Public Debt and Privatization Committee. Mr. Speaker, this is a document or a report that is very important in as far as fiscal planning is concerned and in terms of budget and the budget policy statement is concerned, Mr. Speaker. It is simply just a document by the National Treasury trying to give us or to envision to National Assembly as to how they would want to manage or how they're going to manage debts in the in the coming financial year. And Mr. Speaker, I have taken interest to look at debt management strategy by the National Treasury. And to some extent, Mr. Speaker, I must say Parliament must be alive to what is happening in this country, and especially on the issue to do with debt. Because largely, our budget is financed by borrowing, so to say, or through debt. And it has perturbed me, Mr. Speaker, looking back 10 years back. It is sad to say that our borrowing has gone up to about 350%, from 2.25 trillion to about 11 trillion to date. That is something that should concern every member of Parliament, because that is our business to oversight National Treasury, because at times they are just borrowing happy. Borrowing happy in the sense that, Mr. Speaker, there are so many loans that have been committed to this country, yet absorption rate is so low to the extent that we are paying commitment fees for loans that have not hit our coffers. We are borrowing, but the money remains in the pockets of the people who lend us money. It is, I've said this in this house, and I'll say it again. It's a perfect example of walking to a commercial bank, borrowing money, but you do not walk away with that money. You spend that money at the behest of the lender, and that becomes a big burden to this country. You can imagine having borrowed money, but the lender dictates as to how that money should be drawn, but you're paying commitment fees and interest and all. Therefore, it becomes a trap. We are ensnared. We are in a deep hole, some kind of abyss that we are trying to look for life just to get out of it. And Mr. Speaker, it has come to a time that Treasury became serious, and as far as matters debt management is concerned. We talk about expenditure here, and when we're talking about expenditure, this house is always full, because people are happy to expend money, but they are not careful to ask, where is this money coming from? I have listened to one of the members contribute here who has ably said that indeed our budget has two columns, and many people would think, but that is not so, because there is revenue, but this revenue, there is that aspect of debt, and which carries quite a chunk of it. This financial year only, we have borrowed close to 1 trillion shillings. You can imagine, the last financial year we passed, or this financial year we passed debt management strategy that envisaged a situation whereby borrowing would be up to a certain extent. But we have surpassed. No report has come to this house. Yes, we resolved that if National Treasury surpasses the amount that was approved by this house, they should come back with a report explaining why. We have not received that as a debt committee, and it should concern us, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is the other issue of single treasury account, whereby all the monies collected by the government should be deposited in one account of the government. Because as much as we are saying that our borrowing mix is at 55 to 45 this financial year, we cannot live to this, because at the end of the game, we find that we borrow more than is envisaged in this document. Last financial year, it was 50-50. We have exceeded. It is 63%, 63 to about 37. That is to say, we are not living up to resolutions of this House. Mr. Speaker, I strongly feel that National Assembly should just rise up to the
Honorable Thuku, I've recognized you speaking to yourself. Let me take it that you have concluded your contribution. I'll give you 1 minute to tie well your
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your magnanimity. What I was trying to say is that, Mr. Speaker, as a House, we must live to our calling and to our responsibility. We must oversight National Treasury. They should not just be presenting documents to this House. Once we interrogate them and pass resolutions, assume that that is the end of the House. We are just spectators in this game. We are not spectators. We are players. We are part of budget-making process. And the National Treasury must be well advised that any document that they present to this House is for purposes of consumption of this House and oversight. And we are going to keep them on their toes, so that then we bring down this story of debt from whatever it is to a figure that is manageable. And finally, Mr. Speaker, on the issue, I can see the clerk is on me. Kindly just be kind with me. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the issue of wanton borrowing must be dealt with once and for all by this House, because only this House can pronounce itself on that matter. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Chair, Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, and the Honorable Martin Owino Peters, I will be giving you the chance to contribute after the Honorable Dr. Jackson Kosgei. Honorable Jackson Kosgei.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the onset, I wish to support this report and motion. Mr. Speaker, allow me to reflect on the history of the rise and fall of empires in history for the last 6,000 years. Historians have summarized reasons that have made governments to stand or fall. Number one, Mr. Speaker, is a sound fiscal policy. A government's plan and decisions that determines how much money to borrow and to collect in taxes and how to spend it and how to meet expenditures in the country. If this is not done, it has brought down regimes. It is important that when the constitution that currently we are using in this country gave Parliament that role, that solemn role, to participate in the financial policy of the country, it meant well, because this can sustain the country. Number two, Mr. Speaker, it has been found that what sustains a nation is a national pride, where people are proud of their own country. I remember when the President Kibaki was talking about the raising of resources in this country, he came from the point of a national pride, that lipa ushuru ujitegemee. We be proud to be Kenyans, be proud to sustain our country, be proud to be the one paying the bills of our men and women serving in the civil service, sustaining this country. We must be proud irrespective of any party that divide in political affiliation, but citizenry belonging to this country. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, as I support, this House should be able to look in depth to analyze how and what impact it will have on our economy, any consideration on any new borrowed money, and how we can deal with it. I cannot overemphasize, because colleagues have dealt into it. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, I support the motion. Thank you.
Honorable Martin Owino Peters, MP from Dewa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I too want to support this report. Mr. Speaker, there are some idioms which also teaches us. For example, debt is slavery to those who are free. But if those who are free are indebted grossly, they become the slaves of the debt of the lender, for this case. And also, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Sir George there is a friend of mine. But if you see him biting off what he cannot chew repeatedly, you know he will choke over that. The situation for our country is grave, is serious when it comes to debt. And as a House, I think somebody said, it's a fiduciary responsibility for this House. Let us stop lamenting, but oversight the executive so that they don't go overboard. To me, how I understand policy is that it's a plan of action. The policy statement we make, and also now we have come with the midterm strategy. Strategy is also as the policy, action plan which should be followed when doing stuff. And in following that, I think as a House, we did amendment of our standing orders that we should get the reports from these ministries every 3 months. Let's not rely on auditors' report. It's too late. All these yearly reports are too late when things have already been done.
But if we can follow closely and see what is being done after 3 months, then we can prevent some of these things. I think that is the right intervention we should tap into. Mr. Speaker, there is something here which I think is very, very grave as well, and that is the fidelity to the plans which we have put in. For example, look at the interest. Actually, we are paying only interest. Over 90% of what we pay is interest, not even principal. And then there's another animal called the exchange rate. Every time our shilling loses a shilling down, we pay 40 billion to the loan because of the exchange rate. So the Treasury should be really uptight in making sure that the Kenya shilling does not fall that gravely to the dollar. Lastly, this point which I want to make, Mr. Speaker, I think it has been cited many, many times. Contingency spending. The notorious 223, Article 223. This is what puts the government way over what they are supposed to be spending whenever they are allocated money. Perhaps we need to amend this. I know there will be a lot of resistance, but spending before and looking for sanitation later is what is causing all this problem. And I think we should stand up as a house and say, enough is enough for this Article 223. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, I think for us to, there's a mission here which I thought should have been included in this midterm strategy, and that is the debt renegotiation. There's some debts should just be renegotiated. There's no way we are going to meet them, especially when you commit, you don't use it, and it continues to accumulate the interest. You should sit back with the lender and say, look, for us to remain relevant in this market, let us renegotiate this and pay this way. Otherwise, I thank the committee, and I think as a house, as I said, let us stand for the people of Kenya to say no more borrowing to pay for other borrowed money. Thank you.
The Member of Parliament for Undanyi, Honorable Mashako.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support the report, the 2024 Medium-Term Debt Management Strategy report that comes to this House at the appropriate time. Honorable Speaker, it is important to put things into perspective. Many years back, Mr. Speaker, this country has been engaging into borrowing, both locally and out of this country, foreign borrowing, without involving Parliament. But this report, Honorable Speaker, the medium-term debt management strategy, outlines clearly the policy of government on how they intend to engage into borrowing to make sure that the budget deficits that every year when we pass budget are able to be covered through borrowing. Honorable Speaker, it is important to realize that as this debt management strategy is a government policy, and we want to say that now that the government has brought this document to Parliament as per the Constitution and as per the PFM Act of 2012, it's upon this House that we should make sure that the policies and the aspirations that have been outlined in these documents are fulfilled. Honorable Speaker, many times borrowing in this country has been shrouded in controversy. You remember the times of Eurobond, when it was clear that money came into the country, but you could not trace where the money went. But today, as we read this report, we find ourselves in a situation where there's hope that if this document is to be followed to the letter, then this country, we may get ourselves into a better way of managing our fiscal debts. and more so, Honorable Speaker, not to overburden the current generation, but also the future generation, Honorable Speaker. There's a principle in our Constitution that talks about intergenerational equity, Honorable Speaker. Today, we may be excited about the big projects that are done through money that we borrow from Chinese and every other partners out there. But if we are not prudent enough, then we'll be overburdening our children to a situation whereby we bequeath our children a country that is not, sustainable, and therefore we fail in our duty as people who are responsible. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, I want to say that when I remember last year when the CS Treasury brought to this House the attempt to change our debt from an absolute number of 10 trillion, and indicated that we want to change it to an anchor, a percentage of GDP. And they indicated that our aspiration is to have 55% debt to GDP. We raised a lot of issues, Honorable Speaker, because it looked like there's just another gimmick to confuse Parliament and confuse the country, Honorable Speaker. Today, we are at above, in this report, is indicating that we are above 70% to GDP. So the ability of this government to reduce the debt borrowing to 55% plus 5 that they indicated is something that must be looked at, must be pushed, must be forced, so that this government shows they have the will and the heart to bring down borrowing, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, before I end, Honorable Speaker, I must say that we have realized that a good mix of domestic and foreign borrowing, it's recommended around 45% should be foreign and 55% should be local. But in this report, it shows clearly that we have reversed that trend. We have more foreign borrowing vis-a-vis domestic borrowing. And Honorable Speaker, we find ourselves in huge risks of exchange risks, whereby when we know our shilling had lost a lot of value, depreciated against the dollar, and most of our debt is dollar denominated. And therefore, we end up having our debt ballooning without real value coming to the country. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, we must ensure that as we balance between costs and risks.
The Speaker adds you 2 minutes to conclude your...
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. So we must look at the trade-offs between, if we borrow more on foreign loans, Honorable Speaker, we are at risk of the exchange rate risk. And at the same time, when we borrow more in the local currency, Honorable Speaker, we may be crowding out investors and private sector in the country. So this trade-off, Honorable Speaker, must be well calculated. And therefore, this report, I like the part that they say Treasury must submit, after immediately we pass this report, they must submit to this House, Honorable Speaker, their debt sustainability analysis, so that we are able to know that the debt we carry as a country is sustainable, is a debt that we are able to manage and pay, Honorable Speaker. Yesterday, I sit in the Budget Committee, Honorable Speaker. The PS National Treasury sat before us and told us that this debt, what they call fiscal consolidation path, they have been following. They wish to make it friendly so that we do not, we have to cover our debt, our budget deficits. But at the same time, Honorable Speaker, we must say that we must continue paying our debt in good time. As we pay our debt, we should not sacrifice cheap debt to an expensive debt like we did recently, whereby Eurobond, we raised it at 6.75, now we'll be paying at 10-point-something%, and we call that sustainability, Honorable Speaker. So as I sit, Honorable Speaker, it is my hope that this policy will be followed, and this Parliament must keep the government into check, so that then we find dividends out of this good report I support. Thank you.
Honorable David Ikaria, as the chairperson enrollment.
Nashukuru sana Honorable Speaker kwa kunipa nafasi kwa kuchangia mjadala huu wa mambo ya madeni. Mheshimiwa Speaker, deni ni kitu ambaye tukiangalia sana katika maisha yetu kama mtu, kama familia, kama nchi, nani hana deni? Na unaangalia hii pesa ambapo unapoenda kutafuta ndio uweze kufanya, unaenda kukopa kwa kufanyia nini? Kuna pesa ambazo zinakopwa ambazo hazina faida kabisa katika nchi yetu ya Kenya. Hata kwako nyumbani unapokopa ni lazima uwe unaweka uzito. Nikikopa kwa sababu ni lazima niwe na mshahara wa kutosha, kama ni serikali ni lazima iokote pesa na njia mikakati ya kuweza kuokota hela zile ambazo zitasaidia kulipa madeni haya, na pia unakopa kutoka kwa nani, na kama utashindwa kulipa mambo gani yatafanyika? Ni maswali mengi ambayo inafaa tujiulize wakati tunakopa, wakati tunaenda kuchukua hizi hela, edha kama ni ya mtu binafsi ama ni kwa nchi. Na kwa sasa katika vile tumeweka idara yetu ya fedha imetoa mikakati ya kutuelekezea ya kwamba hatujaenda vizuri, na tunajua kweli hatujaenda vizuri. Hapo awali, Mheshimiwa Spika, unakumbuka pesa zinachukuliwa ambazo zinakuja kufanya miradi, na hii miradi si miradi tu ya kuja kuweka hela bila kutoa mapato. Lakini wakati mwingi hakuna wakati tulikuja tukaambiwa hizi hela zilifanya kazi gani ama zilienda kutumika kwa njia gani, ndio tuweze kusema kwa kweli tunapata ile pesa, ile value, wanasema kwa kizungu value for what you have borrowed. Kwa hivyo ninataka kusema ya kwamba, Mheshimiwa Spika, ninaona mikakati mingi na ninashangaa ikiwa bado idara yetu ya Ministry ya Fedha bado inaweka mikakati tangu tupate independence, lakini tunaendelea kukiuka. Wenzetu wachache hapa wamesema ya kwamba tuwekee mikakati na tufanye kazi zetu kama wajumbe. Hii maneno si ya executive hata kidogo. Mambo haya yote tumepitisha katika sheria zetu. Chochote ambaye executive anataka kufanya sana sana kuhusiana na haya maneno ni lazima ipitie kwa hii nyumba, na kama inapita kwa hii nyumba na tunapitisha, then hatuwezi kuweka lawama kwa mtu mwingine. Lawama ni sisi wajumbe, tukae chini na tujiulize, kwa sababu tunakopa hizi pesa ni za kufanyia nini? Tunapokubalia serikali ikope ndio iweze ende kufanya, ni kuuliza maswali, tutarudi tupate mapato gani? Kwa mikakati gani ambayo tutakuwa tunaweka? Na kama vile ninaona ripoti hii ambayo imeandikwa na kamati ambaye husika, tunawashukuru kwa kazi nzuri, na tunaomba ya kwamba isiwe tu tena ni matamshi, ni maneno, wakaketi tukaweka maneno kwa karatasi kisha tena tukakuja tena kufanya kinyume na ile mambo ambaye tunaweka mikakati ya kuweza kufuatilia. Kuna njia nyingi ambazo mandugu zetu katika hii wizara na kamati yetu ya fedha ambayo imepitia kuangalia, lakini ni lazima tuangalie na tuulizane ya kwamba ni muhimu kama nchi tusiwekee madeni hata kwa watoto ambaye bado hawajazaliwa, ya kwamba hii madeni kama tunayafanya, kila mtu lazima abebe mzigo wake kwa wakati unayofaa. Ni makosa sana mimi nibebe niwachie mwingine aje alipe kama vile ilivyotendeka. Nitabeba kwa sababu najua niko na miaka fulani, na mimi nikimaliza miaka yangu atakaye kuja kulipa, hiyo sio shughuli. Nafikiria sisi kama bunge tuko na majukumu ya kusimamisha fikra kama hizo kwa siku zijazo, ya kwamba mimi kwa sababu niko mjumbe hapa miaka 5, sijali vile nitakavyofanya kwa hii miaka 5, yule mwingine atakaye kuja ndio atakuwa anabeba mzigo huu. Tunaomba Wizara ya Fedha na kamati yetu kutoka sasa wachukue mikakati isipotendeka, kwa sababu kama sisi tunapigia upato hii pite, lakini kisha pita tena tuone mambo haya bado tunaambiwa tumeingia trilioni sasa 15, alafu tunaanza kusema ni ile bunge ya mwaka jana, ni ile sijui wale ama ni yule rais aliyekuweko na mipango. So hii ni mambo ambayo inafaa tuangalie na tuweke hii mikakati ambayo inawekwa, na ile vitu yote ambayo wameahidi
The Member of Parliament for Bomet County, the Honorable Linear Chepkorir, on very special request, make your contribution. I'm seeing a request, she was consulting the Honorable Joseph Lelmengit. It's normal for some of the best leaders we have in the country today to consult. Make your contributions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was still consulting. I've just entered in. Thank you. But I will contribute before the end of this debate.
I didn't get you well, Honorable, the Member of Parliament for Bomet County. Or you're waiting to contribute to the next one? Oh, sorry. Well done. That is, let us all have the Honorable Stephen Mogaka. But really, before Honorable Stephen Mogaka, the Honorable Joseph Lelmengit has made a request. Let us have the MP for Mwen before Honorable Stephen Mogaka.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving this opportunity to also give my voice on this debate and to let you know that I support this debate, and first thank the committee for public debt for coming up with this report on medium-term debt strategy. First, on this issue, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the President. During the last financial year, he tried and persuaded the committees of this Honorable House that we cut down the budget by close to 300 billion shillings. For this case, the principle is don't spend the money that you don't have. And we really need to cut down on the budget, because as a country, we understand the challenges that we have, especially on the extent of borrowing that we've done over the years. Right now, Mr. Speaker, every month, the money that we collect in every 100 shillings, close to 73 shillings goes to payment of debt, and the rest, less than 30 shillings, are for recurrent expenditures and also on development of the budget of this country, which is actually, we are on the red line. And these are big challenges that we have. Now, the other question is to the Treasury. Are these monies that we are borrowing being used prudently on the projects within the country? Is it fairly allocated in different regions of this country? So that, Mr. Speaker, whenever we also pay for this debt as a country or through the taxpayers' money, can we see a more fair distribution of these resources across board? Because all the Kenyans from this country, Mr. Speaker, are the ones who are paying taxes. So this is a big question to the Treasury. Again, are we budgeting for corruption on these issues? This is the hardest thing that we need to deal with on issues of corruption. As much as we need to borrow this money, we need to use them prudently. We need to cut down on the expenses and also the luxurious expenses within our ministries. For example, Mr. Speaker, one time I asked the President where we would get the money to finance the operations of this government. And he said, running a government is like running a family. Whenever you don't have money as the head of breadwinner of the family, what do? One way is easy, or a lazy person would easily continue borrowing, without even taking interest or consideration of the people or the generations to come who will pay this foreign debt. But the other way around, Mr. Speaker, is cutting down on our expenses and living within our means. Instead of, for example, instead of buying a 300 ml Coca-Cola in a very expensive and luxurious hotel that goes for, say, 400 shillings, you can still buy the same 300 ml Coca-Cola in a local or a retail shop that goes for 50 shillings. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to support this motion that we really need to cut down on those expenses and also cut down on borrowing. Again, I would like to encourage and persuade the Treasury so that they can stick on the previous guidelines that we provided, borrowing from external sources, foreigners, up to 65%, and domestic borrowing up to 35%. Why do we go overboard? We need to be true to our word, and also so that we can win trust of Kenyans. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, is on expenditure. We need to ask the executive to spend this money prudently so that we stop budgeting for corruption. All this time across within our constituencies, people ask us, why, Weshimiwa, you are budgeting for corruption? People are exaggerating expenditure or money for different projects. And people nowadays, Mr. Speaker, as the way the President put last time, that tumeishiwa na wajinga within this country. They understand what is the cost of constructing a certain road, what is the cost of constructing a classroom, what's the cost of constructing different. So whenever they see that we have hiked the prices or tendering prices for particular projects, they also question. So we need to ask the executive, and we pray.
The Member of Parliament for Karachuonyo, the best finance mind we have in the House. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the compliment. Now, let me start by saying, Mr. Speaker, that before we borrow, we should actually find out why we are borrowing. Let us not borrow money for recurrent. Let us borrow money that will help us invest in this country. That is very, very important. If we know what we are borrowing for, and we borrow that money for that purpose, we should be able to follow up the progress of implementation. We should be quarterly receiving reports on the progress of the work as it is going on, so that we can make sure that the project started on loan is completed. This is very important because a number of times we may find we have spent a lot of money on a project we cannot be completed. So, Mr. Speaker, the other very important point is the cost of borrowing. We should be very, very conscious of the cost of from external sources. I am aware that when our money goes down in value, and when it is that we borrowed from external sources, the borrowed money, the loan itself, increases in amount without any benefit of the increase of the loan. This is because of the value of the money as we pay the loan we borrowed. So I think when we look at that cost, Mr. Speaker, it will call upon us to be also able to see the behavior of our Kenya shillings. Because if Kenya shillings is not protected, then we are exposing ourselves to more debts. We are exposing ourselves to local problems in our purchases, especially purchases from without the country, meaning buying from outside Kenya. That becomes also expensive. So what I really want to emphasize is that we should also look at the time we are borrowing. If we are borrowing at a time Kenya shillings is very weak, we will be getting dollars at a very high cost in terms of our money. And that gives us the burden of repayment. In fact, I would even think of a possibility where if Kenya's shillings is strong, you borrow at that time, even if the excess can go to your reserve, in order that you can use this reserve when things get worse with our money. The other thing which is also increasing the problems of borrowing is these so-called pending bills. Because that's another borrowing. Let's call it what it is. We are borrowing from wrong people. We are borrowing locally from contractors. And this is adding into our burden when we are repaying our debts. So I wanted us to be holistic in looking at this issue to avoid the possibility of creating a burden that is impossible for us to pay. Mr. Speaker, thanks for giving me time to contribute to this noble debate, and I beg to support.
Honorable Stephen Mugaka.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity and for also giving my elder to go ahead of me. I also want to support this report of this committee and put my input as follows. One, it's commendable that this report complies with the Public Finance Management Act as well as the Standing Order, and to that extent, it is kudos to the committee. But a bit disappointing from the committee is their observation about the level of public participation during the consideration and preparation of this report. Mr. Speaker, the public debt is a matter of public concern, and that we have a report in Parliament without public participation quite undermines the very public interest that we are looking at it. I don't know why the public did not get to know that there is this session going on, and if they knew, why they kept away from it. Going forward, I would suggest that the committee goes an extra mile to ensure that even if we are going to conduct our proceedings live, we get the public get involved. This is so important, Mr. Speaker, because it is the public who put pressure on government about fulfilling election manifestos, about fulfilling election pledges, which end up in the Appropriation Act, which invariably creates a budget deficit that has got to be filled in through both public, external and domestic debt. And therefore, I would want going forward the public be an integral part, particularly on the x-raying of the level of public debt, and they give their input on the strategy that we are going to employ as a nation to manage the debt. The second observation I make is that it is no doubt that Treasury is the one which has presided over the creation of the public debt, and it is the same Treasury we are going to rely on going forward in implementation of this medium-term debt management strategy. I will urge this committee to go an extra mile for the sake of the Republic to ensure that the recommendations of this report are followed to the letter. Because if we get off the road, we will suffer the public wrath and we will suffer defaults from our financiers, which will interfere or bring down the credit rating of this country that has a stellar performance in redeeming the Eurobond and meeting its international obligations. Mr. Speaker, I also want to suggest to the committee that now that we are in the ICT era, let us create a platform for making online surveillance of what is happening with our public debt. The last I heard is that the register was manual. Let us live the age we live in so that this committee is upbeat and to help us make sure that we do the right thing. Then what I call upon us as a House, Mr. Speaker, is to do our oversight role. Because at the end of the day, this strategy is extremely good, but let it not be yet another policy paper that will be gathering dust in the archives of our good government officers in the executive. Above all, I would want to urge members of the public to be patriotic, because these debts have been incurred by this country, to do projects and support the budget for this country. And when it comes upon us, when duty calls upon the citizens of this country to make their contribution through taxes to redeem these debts as well as support the development agenda, I call upon us to rise to the occasion and do our obligation. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to contribute.
Honorable Julius Meli.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I want to, first of all, laud the Chair and the Committee on Public Debts and Privatization. Honorable Speaker, Honorable Shuria and his committee has done a wonderful job. If only that the National Treasury is going to stick to the issues raised, more specifically, Honorable Speaker, when you look at the medium-term expenditure framework, SACCO, every other time, the National Treasury issues a very good framework on budget policy statement, and it also issues a very good framework on medium-term debt management. But there is no consistency on the two. Honorable Speaker, the other day as a House, we sat and looked through the budget policy statement. The budget policy statement forms a basis under which we are funding a budget. It gives the policies, the frameworks, the programs that underpins the estimates that we are going to have. But Honorable Speaker, you'll realize that every other time it has become a circus at times, where you find we have a very good document, but the programs underpinning that particular funding lacks. So we want the National Treasury to be consistent on that the medium term, the MTEF, and the debt management, and the budget policy statement speaks to one thing, so that we move as one. Two, Honorable Speaker, the National Treasury, I want to thank the committee also that the National Treasury, every other time, should actually be coming to this House to get for approvals, especially on issues that are affecting or making us to borrow or to increase debt. There's an issue, Honorable Speaker, that at times, the other day we had issues on borrowing, that actually our debt went up because of interest rates, because of exchange rates, and even because of what we call contingency spending. To an extent that, for example, the dollar at one time was 120 shillings. Now it's 160 shillings. You know, at the international market, we as a country, we are going to even pay more. Those are the issues now we are telling the National Treasury. When you are borrowing, look into this, so that when you are making forecasts to borrow, you know very well that the interest rates are moving at this, the contingencies that are coming in place are this, so that when you borrow within a framework that you understand it very well. Honorable Speaker, the other issue that is very clear is that the National Treasury should submit a report to the National Assembly providing practical measures to reduce the domestic debt service burden to the sustainable level. Actually, if this is not done, Honorable Speaker, local banks and borrowing within the local market is going to be a problem. The interest rates will go through the roof if we are not going to make sure that the local market is actually, we have a capping, so that even it will spur development, it will spur borrowing from small people. If we can't do that, interest will go very high, and even the banks will not have money to give. They'll only give to the government because the government is the only one who will be able to pay. The other issue which I want to thank the committee is the issue on that the National Treasury publishes, that it will ensure that the National Treasury, the other issue which is very important is the submit a comprehensive report to the House the National Assembly on the breach of the debt anchor of 55%. This one has been said severally, but every other time when the National Treasury has to, because this is actually the very important government department that has the responsibility of ensuring that the debt is managed and brought to not go beyond the 55% or plus 5 digits. So that is the reason why we are saying the National Treasury has a very big role to ensure that that particular aspect is kept and they report to this House, because this House represents the people. Honorable Speaker, because the issues raised here are actually very important, and I want to ask that such particular issue, the Committee of Implementation, the Committee of Budget, has to look into this particular issue so that every other time that important policy matters placed before this House are actually passed, let them be stick to and let the committees involved ensure that they are implemented to the letter. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
For Taita Taveta.
Asante Bwana Spika, hata mimi kwa kunipatia nafasi niweze kuchangia katika mjadala huu, na nikianza mwanzo tu nataka kusema pia mimi nataka kuunga mkono ripoti hii ya hii kamati ya mambo ya madeni kwa umma. Na Bwana Spika, nataka kusema hivi ya kwamba kukopa na kukopeshana kupo, lakini ni lazima tujue tunakopa kwa malengo gani na tunayo mikakati gani ya kuhakikisha ya kwamba hizi fedha ambazo tunaweza kukopa zinaweza kuboresha maisha ya wananchi. Bwana Spika, tumeona mara nyingi pesa zimeweza kukopwa na zikafika kwa nchi na baadaye ikawa ni manunguniko ya kwamba pesa hizo hazikufanya ile kazi ambayo inastahili, pesa hizo, fedha hizo hazikuenda kwa walengwa. Kwa hivyo ni vivema sana ya kwamba wakati tuna kopa zile pesa ziwe na mikakati ambayo ina kabisa dhabiti ambayo inaenda kufanyia kazi. Bwana Spika, jambo la pili pia ni kusema ya kwamba wakati pesa hizo zinafika, ni vizuri kuona ya kwamba fedha hizo zimeweza kuboresha wananchi wote kwa jumla. Pesa hizo zisije zikaombwa alafu zikawa zinafika upande mmoja ya nchi na upande mwingine hazifiki ama hazisaidii ama upande mwingine haziboreshi upande mwingine wa nchi, na wakati wa kulipa basi wananchi wote kwa jumla wanajumuishwa kwa kulipa. Nikimaliza kwa sababu ya muda, Bwana Spika, nataka kusema dawa ya deni ni kulipa. Na kwa hivyo wakati mpango mzima wa kukopesha pesa ama wa kukopa pesa, ni vizuri pia tuwe na mikakati mizuri, yani vipi pesa hii itaenda kulipwa, ili tusije kuwalimbikizia madeni vizazi na vizazi vinavyokuja. Mtoto hajazaliwa tayari anadaiwa kwa sababu tulikopa pale mbele bila mipango mizuri. Kwa hivyo naunga mkono ripoti hii, na ni jambo jema ya kwamba tunaweza kuyazungumzia hapa bungeni masuala haya ya kuweza kukopa na kukopesha pesa kutoka kwa nchi mbalimbali ama nchi za nje. Asante.
The Honorable Commissioner Mishiboko.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, sir. Honorable Speaker, I also stand to give support to the report 2024 on consideration of medium-term debt management strategy. Honorable Speaker, I want to say it is high time that as members of Parliament, we need to ensure that the strategies and the policies which are being laid down should be implemented and more so to be enforced, so that we rescue our country from sinking due to public debts. Honorable Speaker, before we take any kind of a loan, we need to know what is the purpose for borrowing. Sometimes we borrow so that we can finance the government budget. Sometimes we borrow to finance some projects. But do we ask our questions? These projects we are going to build or to create, are they going to be able to finance the loans which we have taken? That is a question which we need to answer. Number two, we should also ensure that there is zero rated in terms of corruption, because most of the time, in terms of taking loans for financing of development projects, we have some people do some deals or they do some shortcut. I mean, they can put some more amount so that they can have their cut, and for that reason, the country loses a lot. Honorable Speaker, the other thing, before also we borrow, we need to know what kind of a loan are we taking. Is it a concessional loan or is it a commercialized loan? Because for commercialized loan, it means it will keep on accruing some interest and it will reach a time where we cannot be managed maybe to repay it. But sometimes if we take concessional loans, and these are loans which we do under multi-all bilateral arrangement, and this is where sometimes you can renegotiate and maybe get a waiver, or rather maybe you are given more time to repay that loan. So, Honorable Speaker, we need to know what kind of a loan are we taking. Honorable Speaker, also we need to do some analysis in terms of cost benefit. We need to know, are we taking this loan? Are we going to benefit or are we going to lose? Not just any other time you are enticed that you need to take this loan. Some people, influencers, maybe the IMF, they can tell you, the World Bank, you take this loan and you just agree without doing the cost benefit analysis. It can be very risky, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, also, we also need to know the issue of cutting on expenses, as what other honorable members have said. That is paramount. It is important. We need to cut our expenses so that we ensure we don't lose any costing or rather any funding on that reason. Honorable Speaker, I want to say, as a country, right now the public debt is very, very high. And for us, even before we get that loan, let us know the debt sustainability. How are we going to sustain? Are we really going to sustain knowing what is the total public debt right now? What will be the risk of taking a new debt? Those are the questions which we need to discuss and agree whether are we taking that debt or are we not taking that debt. Honorable Speaker, right now it is high time that we should just reduce the borrowing, because right now we are having some trillions. It has reached on trillions. We're not even talking on billions. We are talking on trillions. So this is a time where we need to put a pause on our borrowing. And if it is projects, maybe let us just complete the project which are already there, and let us also emphasize and target the project which can generate some income or rather some funding and can also be able to finance those loans which we have taken as a country. Also, Honorable Speaker, I also want to emphasize on what other members have said. We keep on taking loans, we keep on burdening Kenyans, our current generation, our future generation, and our economy is going down each and every day. Also, Honorable Speaker, when we are taking a loan or we are doing some borrowing, we need to know what currency are we using. Are we using their currency? Are we using our currency? Because this one really affects us right now, because our currency is not adding any value. It is going down. It has become a challenge for us because we have been borrowing using the foreign currencies. So that is an area where we also need to emphasize. Otherwise, I want to support this report. And
the Honorable John Mutunga, you have under 5 minutes.
Honorable Speaker, I wish I could tell somebody else to protect me from you, because I've been raising my hand actually almost literally since I was here, and I've seen something go wrong. Honorable Speaker, the debt management strategy has come for us to look at, and I like the mood in the House. Honorable Speaker, today I've listened to people speak, honorable members speak on today's motion, and I've been wishing this is how we debate on issues touching on matters this country. The debt management strategy is a strategy that has been brought to us, and the committee has given their comments. Treasury is mandated to look at this strategy, Honorable Speaker. To develop a strategy to manage debt as per the Constitution and also as per the laws of Kenya, specifically the Public Finance Management Act, which basically prescribes even how the strategy should be done. And it is purposely meant to cause management of the debt. It is not just an expose of how much debt we have. It is not an outlay of the extent to which we have borrowed, but it's supposed to enable us to manage debt. The goals of this particular strategy, Honourable Speaker, is basically to reduce the debt costs. One is to reduce the debt cost, to lengthen the maturity period, and support the domestic market. If we have to reduce the debt cost, we must be conscious of how our trend moves. Honourable Speaker, we, as a country, we get often into very high debt levels, and we have already gotten into very high debt levels. And the rising high debt levels, Honourable Speaker, basically raises the sustainability concerns. Are we able to sustain very high debts as an issue? Right now, Honourable Speaker, we can speak to the fact that the Kenya's public debt is sustainable, but there are very high risks of distress. So these risks needs to be looked into. If Treasury is going to listen to what members have said today in this House, then Treasury will keep on monitoring this particular debt to the extent that they will make sure that it is managed to levels where the risks are not extremely high, that it may not be distressful. Honourable Speaker, it also needs to bring in measures to include fiscal consolidation and optimizing funding to mitigate risks. When we are at fiscal consolidation, Honourable Speaker, sometimes you marvel at the extent to which we are not very conscious of fiscal consolidation itself. We talk about it a lot, but when you try to ask yourself how much do we do to make sure that we reduce the deficit, really the fiscal deficit, every year we post a budget which has a bigger deficit than the previous year. And every year we always keep on increasing money that is being used in the current expenditure as opposed to the development expenditure. And Honourable Speaker, every year you see budgeting for things that do not really, we can say are not priority as far as we are concerned as a country. The shift in debt composition is an issue that we need to be very careful about. Honourable Speaker, we are more reliant on borrowing out, domestically than borrowing out there. We need to change this equation and focus a lot more in relying a lot more in long-term concessional loans than borrowing the very costly local loans. The other issue that is important is the servicing cost of the debt. Of course, the drop of the shilling increases the servicing cost of the debt. And this is a trend that needs to be monitored very carefully, such that if there is any movement of the shilling, we try to see how we can bring in containment measures. The diversification of the borrowing, we are a lot more limited to a few. We need to open up and diversify our borrowing. We need to look at what else, which other frontiers can we access, how much of the PPPs are we getting into, how much of the green bonds are we going for, and so that we can diversify the borrowing. Honourable Speaker, the other issue that is key is the issue of market reforms. How much of over-the-counter trading platforms have we opened, and how much of this do we adopt as a country if we have to manage this debt? And Honourable Speaker, because I can see my time is going, let me say the final thing is transparency and accountability. How much do we expose this to Kenyans so that they can also follow what Treasury is doing? And
Mover. I recognize the interest generated, but our standing order provides that the time has now reached for Mover to reply. And it is, I'm not able to extend it. Honorable Ruku, I know you really wanted to contribute, but I cannot extend it. The only exception I would create is if the mover were to be philanthropic enough to donate a few minutes to members. Otherwise, you all know once time reaches for the movers to reply. The mover, how many minutes has the mover to reply? 10 minutes. You want to be gracious enough to donate a few of your minutes?
Honorable Speaker, I have no choice. You put me on the spot, and I can see Ruku giving me a look that scares the shit out of me, with all due respect. So let me give 2 minutes, I think, to Mheshimiwa Ruku and Mheshimiwa Mushomba.
Now there is somebody behind you.
Oh, sorry, and the Mheshimiwa as well. 2 minutes.
Yeah, so 2 minutes each.
Thank you.
Honorable Ruku.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, the mover. Mr. Speaker, I rise to put my voice on especially this issue of debt management or liability, public liability management of our nation. It's a concern that has been hanging over the neck of this nation for quite some time. Liability management, Mr. Speaker, is key, and every department that's working in the Treasury, they should be in a position to coordinate properly so that our debt can be properly managed. And for us to be able to manage our liabilities properly, for instance, at the moment, Mr. Speaker, by the close of last month, I think there was about 411 billion Kenyan shilling, which was maturing domestic debt for this nation, for this government to be able to pay. Financial shocks, they are generated because if we are not able to manage our liabilities properly. And it is important, Mr. Speaker, to recognize that there are clear benefits if debt management is done in a most prudent way. Because the risk associated with overburdening the nation with excessive debts will be managed properly. Also, the coordination of monetary policies or monetary management so that we can be more accountable to the Kenyans when it comes to foreign debt as well as domestic debts, and also so that we can be able to know when to remit ourselves in borrowing, whether locally or internationally.
The Honorable Mudhoni wa Muchomba.
Mine is already on, but it's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support the adoption of the financial resolutions, but with caution. With caution, Mr. Speaker, because the story of deficit is deafening. Deficits every time we are speaking about loans and budgeting processes in this House. Mr. Speaker, I was reading an article that was written by somebody who is not in Kenya, so I don't know how credible it is, but that article made me feel scared. And that article was outlining the extent as to which Kenyans have borrowed. We have borrowed loans that will comfortably be paid after 29 years from the article, the day the article was written. And that really scared me. That is to mean any child that is going to be born today will have to wait for 29 years for that child to be off debt. And that is not very good news. And this House must interrogate and interrogate the processes of borrowing in this country. Mr. Speaker, other countries have moved away from deficit to something we call national sovereign wealth. It is sad that Kenya, we no longer talk about sovereign wealth, we talk about debts. So in other words, what we are investing for our young people, our young generation, it is not generational wealth, it is generational debts. That is to mean the future of this country is sunk into debts. And therefore, even as we speak in this House and say, oh, the Auditor General must be fired because she's highlighting a lot of issues that are concerning Kenyans in debts, we must ask ourselves, are we being very fair to the generation of this country? And to what extent have we created a generational wealth that Kenyans, young Kenyans, will forever enjoy? Otherwise, the story of deficits and loans, the stories are really saddening. And therefore, even as I support this policy and recommendations, I would want to be on record to put caution that it is time we start moving from deficit to what we call sovereign national wealth.
The Honorable Edith Nyanze.
Thank you, Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Let me say that every financial year, the National Treasury or the government borrows to finance its physical deficit as stipulated in the budget policy statement. And it also borrows to pay off the maturing debts. But, Mr. Speaker, unstable debt can lead to debt distress, where a country is unable to fulfill its financial obligations. And therefore, our country, if it reaches that point of distress, it will be very pathetic even to the Kenyans. So that is why it calls for debt restructuring so that we avoid this distress. There should be control of cash flows, which would ensure that there is no leakage, because where there is leakage or corruption, then the debt which you borrowed to maybe do some projects will not be doing so. And if then there is that debt, we should also negotiate with our creditors to ensure that we repay the debt in as stipulated in a good time, so that we don't enter into embarrassment or into distress. We should also make sure that we pay more than the minimum amount which we are required to pay. And it's also good to note that we should pay debts which attract higher interests than debts which do not attract higher debts. But we are looking forward to a time when our country will be stable and we will not have debts in our country. And even if we end the debts, then they should not distress the Kenyans. The Kenyans should not be overtaxed so that we can pay these debts. So we are looking forward to such a time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mover.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I wish to thank all the members for their contribution, and I'm glad that there is a lot of interest generated in this report, which we truly appreciate as a committee. Honorable Speaker, I wish to put it on record that we did public participation and did publication in the dailies on the MTDS. So on matters public participation, although we did not receive any direct contribution from members of the public. Honorable Speaker, we're making progress as a House, because this is the second time we're debating the MTDS on the floor of this House, and I'm sure you've seen the kind of interest it has generated. And this has not been the case in the past, and we appreciate it. Honorable Speaker, I beg to reply and request that pursuant to Standing Order 53.3, you defer putting of the question to another day. I thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to reply.
A request made by the mover is consented to by the chair. The question on this particular motion will be put the next time it will be scheduled on the order paper by the House Business Committee. Next order.
Order number 15, the Natural Resources Benefit Sharing Bill, Senate Bill number 6 of 2022, second reading.
Mover.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to move that the National Resource Benefit Sharing Bill, Senate Bill number 6 of 2022, be read a second time. Honorable Speaker, let me first of all start by just advising the House that this bill is a Senate bill which was brought, is a private member's bill from the Senate, which was brought by Senator Mungatana of Tana River. And Honorable Speaker, the bill went through its first reading on the 17th August 2023 and was thereafter committed to the Departmental Committee on Environment, Forestry, Climate Change and Mining for consideration and reporting on the House pursuant to the provisions of the National Assembly Standing Order number 143. Mr. Speaker, in accordance to Article 118, Subclause 1B of the Constitution and Standing Order number 127(3), the committee sought views from the public by way of written memoranda and further conducted public participation hearing on the same bill. Organizations, institutions that made their presentation to the committee on the bill included the following, Honorable Speaker: the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry. And Honorable Speaker, in that the ministry objected, of course, to the bill for various reasons that
Majority Leader, the point being made by the chair of the Departmental Committee on Environment is very critical. I want to request that not just you as the leader of in the House, but all members attend to that particular point being made.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. And I know how critical it is, over and above being in the House, me and you being in the field. Sometimes it's very critical for people to concentrate. Otherwise you stop concentrating and you know what happens. You concede so many goals and you lose some. Honorable Speaker, the National Treasury also came before the committee. The State Department of Mining.
The point you are making, Honorable Gikaria, is that the ministry in charge of environment matters is opposed to this bill.
Yes, is opposed to this bill.
Okay, so proceed.
So was the National Treasury. And the basis of the National Treasury on objecting again on the same bill was that, Honorable Speaker, when you come and move a bill that talks about revenue sharing at 60% of the national government and 40% for the county without taking consideration. Because what this bill is doing resource, the natural resource sharing and clumping everything together without taking into consideration the wealth of maybe of the resource or the time that will be, the resource will be there for it to be able to, to be able to be gotten from the ground and so many other aspects. And one of the issues was, there is no way, Honorable Speaker, you can compare sand harvesting with gold. And you say that everybody should get, when you do gold, you get a point in of what the Ministry of Petroleum came and said, if, for example, the Turkana oil had gone to the development phase or development stage, then Turkana County would be getting, currently they are getting around 20 billion shillings from the county allocation. They would be getting like 100 billion out of the 40% only, out of the product of petroleum. So again, that is why Treasury, the Ministry of Mining, again, objected to that. State Department of Energy. Honorable Speaker, we get also resource sharing from geothermal, for example. We also get from solar. In Garissa the other day, they have a very big solar energy that brings about 50 megawatts per day. And again, they also, they are saying, if you then allow us to have this every resource sharing clobber together for a certain percentage. What they were saying is allow each ministry to have what they have in their acts. The State Department of Petroleum, Honorable Speaker, came before the committee. State Department of Wildlife, again, Honorable Speaker, the same again. The State Department of Wildlife did again object to that. The Council of Governors came before the committee. The Kenya Private Sector Alliance, Kenya Wildlife Conservancy Association, Northeastern Conservancy Association, Kenya Oil and Gas Working Group, the Nature Kenya, Samburu Women Trust. And Honorable Speaker, I want to talk about sometimes Parliament is accused of lack of public participation. Honorable Speaker, this group, the Samburu Women Trust, came before the committee and they gave us some very, very weighty issues that they brought. It says, yes, of course, to them they were saying, yes, we want to support what is in the revenue sharing because of the community that in Samburu, for example, that the community will go a long way in getting value for the resource that is within their community. So the Samburu Women Trust, Honorable Speaker, did support, but on the basis that it is going to go. But their objection was, Honorable Speaker, is that the 40% that is sent to the county, then how does it trickle down to the community? Again, this is what the bill does not talk about. And so the Samburu Women Trust was saying we would want a bigger share that will come to the community. Because at the end of the day, assuming you're doing quarry, the gaping quarry holes that are left, they will affect the community in one way or the other, in terms of either doing agriculture, in terms of maybe livestock, and so many other aspects. Maybe when it rains, then you create another dam that causes death and things like that. So again, they did support. We had Peace Net Kenya, Parani, Conservation International, Center of Minority Rights Development. Again, a very important group that came before us and said, yes, this is what we want. That we don't have to have resources that only benefits people from at the national level without trickling down to the county and to the other aspect that came when the Council of Governors was before us is, Honorable Speaker, some resource, they are shared, or you don't know even where it is coming from. Take, for example, geothermal. Honorable Speaker, geothermal is steam that comes from underground, but it is based in Nakuru County, but the steam from the Narok County says the steam comes from us. So how then does the benefit goes to Nakuru County without considering Narok? It could even have come as far as another county again. That steam could be. So these are some of the issues that came out on that material day for the groups that visited. Electricity Sector Association of Kenya, and lastly, Wildlife Works. And again, Honorable Speaker, the migration of animals, for example, and the tourism, that there is so much money that is brought by tourists. Then it says, okay, the animals move from one county to the other, and you know, all this confusion is what was we were able to. Honorable Speaker, the committee noted various comments in support of or against the provisions of the bill, as I've already indicated, Honorable Speaker. The bill has 43 clauses and seeks to provide a legislative framework for the establishment and enforcement of system of benefit sharing in natural resource exploitation between natural resource exploiters, the national government, county government, and local community. Honorable Speaker, again, it comes out that as much as you're mining, as much as you're getting a certain resource and you're making money, then we must look at the environmental aspect of it. And who bears the breath and the cost of that environment? And I will take an example that when it came again in geothermal. They say the machines that do the drilling, all that stuff and the extract that are coming from the ground is felt in Narok. And they can no longer do agricultural activities anymore. Again, these are some of the things that we're saying. Yes, as much as we think of about the resources that is going to come, even if it's at the national level, county level, or the community, then what is the lifetime destruction that comes with that? We might get 1 million shillings, but later pay it with so much. And Honorable Speaker, if you remember during the Kazi kwa Vijana, I was in my constituency when one of the Vijanas were being some work, and without the boots, the gum boots, for example, without gloves. So you end up earning 1,500 per week, and then you spend 10,000 because you got maybe a Msumari that injured you, and you have now to treat yourself with maybe 20, 30,000. Again, it depends on, yes, this is what we have received, but what is at what cost are you leaving us with after you've taken all that is underneath the ground? So the enforcement of a system of benefit sharing in natural resource exploitation between natural resource exploiters, the national government, county government, and local. Honorable Speaker, most of these people who come to do this come from outside the country. So what do? They take as much as they can, they mine as much as they can, and then what happens? All the profits that is gotten with them, say for example, if it is China, it is taken back to China. For example, the Turkana, which was being done by Talo, and Talo is a British, whatever they would have gotten, of what benefit would it be, or would they just be taking all the profit back to their motherland? Some natural resources are finite, which means that if we use them continuously, we will eventually exhaust them. It is true, Honorable Speaker. Not every resource, it is there in its quantities. After some time, it is going to be exhausted. It is for this reason that the Constitution of Kenya mandates Parliament to enact legislation on the exploitation of natural resources. And I think, the Honorable Speaker, just like the other motion which has just passed, Parliament has been given a huge role. And it is important for us to look at legislation, to look at whatever comes before Parliament beyond our political boundaries, beyond parties, and talk about Kenya. Because it is for that purpose that, Honorable Speaker, that if we look at some of the legislation that we come up with, that it is only going to assist a certain area for a period of time, that we need to be nationalist when we come to the lawmaking. We had, Honorable Speaker, remember, at some time I was a member of the Security Committee, and we went to Israel. And we were saying they have different political parties in Israel. But they told us, when it comes to the security of Israel, everybody becomes an Israelite, and they forget about their parties, because they have to protect. It is that common interest that we need, all of us, to be able to look, but not, and some of these issues is saying, I was remembering, Honorable Speaker, when I was the chair of Energy Committee, and we were doing the petroleum and the revenue sharing from the petroleum product. And you know, let me not say it is the animosity, but the differences that are there between Turkana County and West Pokot. Honorable Speaker, the oil is in Turkana. And true to the fact it is there, and it is plenty. But for you to be able to extract that oil, you must get water from West Pokot, which will come and be drained there, so that it pushes the oil for it to come. And these are some of they said it might even bring conflict because of the resources that we cannot give you our water for you to get rich. And if we have to, then we have to split that resource at the middle. And again, these are conflict between counties, and it's unfortunate that even for grazing also bring an issue. A simple as thing like grazing brings a lot of problems between community. So what you're saying, Honorable Speaker, is that the permits, so Honorable Speaker, permit me to highlight important provisions in the bill. First, the bill is applicable to the following natural resources. One, the bill talks about sunlight. Honorable Speaker, what resource? Of course, solar. But if you get solar, say for Garissa, for the solar project, again, that is a resource that you need. Secondly, underground water. Now again, this comes between counties. Where is this bed of water underneath here? And this is a boundary between maybe 3, 4 counties. It talks about forests, biodiversity, genetic resource. Some of these things, Honorable Speaker, baobab tree from Kilifi has been an issue in our committee. And the people are actually taking away the heritage of this country. And what are they going? They are going to plant those baobab things in their country. And imagine a farmer was being paid only 100,000. Yet the cost of transportation from Kilifi to, was it I think in Netherlands, was going to cost almost, one tree was going to cost around, I think over 10 million. Then what is the profit or the benefit to this farmer who is paid only 100,000, yet you spend so much to transport that? And so these are some of the issues that we are talking about: the biodiversity, genetic resources, wildlife resources, industrial fishing. Again, Honorable Speaker, in the Lake region, in Mombasa. Again, these are some of the things that is coming out: wind, thermal resource, minerals, and petroleum. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the bill has introduced benefits as far as natural resources are concerned. According to the bill, that provides for establishment of benefit sharing authority. Now, this is the other bit that where we come from. We come to, Honorable Speaker, this is a money bill. Once you start creating an authority that draws money from the exchequer, then it becomes a money bill. And if you look at Article 114, Honorable Speaker, says all money bills must originate from the National Assembly. Now, and this is where we needed the advice that, Mr. Speaker, anything that is unconstitutional, once we start debating it here, it is pointless. It will find its way to the courts. Again, we'll be blaming the courts for doing the right things. So again, if the Constitution says all money bills must originate from National Assembly, now any money bill originating from elsewhere in itself become unconstitutional. So that is the other thing, Honorable Speaker. And of course, you being a very senior legal person in Kenya, Honorable Speaker, you know it has no two ways. Any unconstitutional thing is unconstitutional, and there is nothing much we can do. So when we start creating benefit sharing authority in terms of facilitating benefit sharing agreement between affected counties, entities, and local communities, and to determine the royalties and fees payable in respect of a particular sector where a written law does not prescribe the royalties or fees. Honorable Speaker, and as I've said again, an unconstitutional legislation or whatever will remain unconstitutional. So again, that is something that the committee did look into. Honorable Speaker, the bill provides for revenue collected shall be shared in the ratio of 60% to the national government and 40% to the respective county government. Additionally, at least 60% of the revenue assigned to the county government shall be used for local community project and 40% for the benefit of the entire county. Honorable Speaker, the bill goes on to tell us how county assemblies now will sit and determine how this money will be spent. Honorable Speaker, take for example in Nakuru County where I come from. I come from an urban constituency vis-a-vis the rural constituency. What happens? We give so much in terms of revenue collection to the county vis-a-vis the rural constituencies. But when we come to sharing, what goes back to the respective wards, we are disadvantaged as coming from an urban constituency. Yet, people gang up, the rural wards gang up to come and defeat the urban, where 60% or 70% of the revenue comes from. Again, now that becomes equity, and say, then if you are giving so much, then why should we get so little? Or you find one ward is very tiny, another one is very, geographical is very big. Then again, you find out they end up, again what you just say is that the bill proposes the county will sit and decide what happens. And you know what happens within the county government, in the assembly. Most of it ends up even not benefiting the county in terms of, they end up not agreeing because everybody is pulling on their side. So where the natural resources are shared by 2 or more counties, the authority shall, in consultation with the affected counties, determine the benefit sharing ratio among themselves. Honorable Speaker, it is going to be war between counties. Turkana will never agree with West Pokot on matters to do with resources in Turkana. It will forever be. So again, this is what the observation of the committee, of course, through the engagement of the public participation that we were. Thirdly, Honorable Speaker, each county that has a natural resource shall establish a county benefit sharing committee. What does it do again? It creates other factors, and it doesn't tell us when they sit, where will they be drawing their, say, for example, allowances, and where will it be coming from? Is it from the share that is going to the county and the community, or is it from the national? So all these things are some things that create a lot of confusion in this proposed benefit sharing ratio, to a point that we think that we will not. And if, again, 3 counties are the ones who are claiming geothermal that is underneath the ground, so should we have every county determining its own committee, constituting its own committee and making decision? Again, that is something that the committee was looking into on matters of sharing formula responsible for implementation of this act. Honorable Speaker, mining and minerals are reserve of the national government. This is well established in the Constitution and detailed in the Mining Act 2016. The role of county government is limited to implementation of specific national government policies. Honorable Speaker, when we read our Constitution, it talks about land, private, public, community. Now, who is vested these powers of owning this land? Mostly is the county government. But it says where minerals are underneath that land, then that becomes the property of the national government. And now in this, it is giving county governments overlapping functions that will not work at all. So this bill again, the bill therefore presents constitutional and administrative implementation challenges by assigning national function to county functions. Again, this is the overlap that we saw, that this bill, of course, I don't want to say just because it originates from Senate and they needed to create some jobs for themselves, that it is what, but as per the Constitution, it talks about, yes, much as land. If you go, I think it is, I'm not a lawyer, but I think it's Article 41, then stipulates, yes, land belongs to that, but any mineral underneath that goes to the national government. Honorable Speaker, benefit sharing is a very specific to us, is very specific to our sector, and several acts of parliament governing natural resource have already set out benefit sharing framework. For instance, Honorable, just the other day, last year, we passed the Climate Change Amendment Act 2023 on carbon projects. Honorable Speaker, in that act, we did provide clauses that talk about when you sell the carbon credits, then how do we benefit national government, county government, and the respective community. That is one aspect that and they have given their percentages to us. I think it was 85-50, and 10 goes to county, 5 goes to the community. But it talks about, it gives further on how they will. The common benefit sharing ratio for renewable and non-renewable extractive resource is therefore inequitable by failing to take into account the unique nature of each resource. And that is what you're saying. You cannot compare sunlight with gold or very important minerals now that we are getting that are used in our phones, in the laptops and things like that, that you cannot. So we need to separate these things, which this bill is not doing. Further, the Mining Act 2016 again provides for determination of royalties payable. And I want to say that the mining, with the thinking of the current administration, Honorable Speaker, Taita Taveta, no, it is not Taita Taveta, Kwale, a community, royalties worth 4 billion was collected. And almost royalties payable, almost 1 billion shillings to Kwale County went there. But now they have never, now once the county gets the money, the community is now takes a back seat. And the community are asking, you were given 1 billion as royalties for titanium. And we are the people who are feeling the brunt of maybe the environmental degradation and things like that. But the county now has taken that money to go and do something else. Again, this is now again where the county again marginalizes or refuses to release the money to the respective community that is affected by that. Again, that is something that we were looking to, and therefore there are major overlaps of the bill with existing legislation. Honorable Speaker, the proposed bill, the Benefit Sharing Authority, present additional cost of governance of natural resource and potential overlap with other government agencies mandated to manage and license the use of natural resource in various sectors. This will present management and administrative challenges. Honorable Speaker, and that is what we are just saying, that you bring in, you don't tell us where the money is going to come from. If it's going to come from exchequer, then why should we are talking about very heavy wage bills. Again, we are saying, let us create this. Then you have the revenue sharing committee at the county level. All these, Honorable Speaker, are wage bill issues that we need to consider. When you bring in an authority, then the board comes in. We have maybe a director general or whoever, and as it is indicated in this, that brings a lot of issues. Honorable Speaker, the bill is not clear on how funds meant to implement local community projects will be budgeted, accounted, and reported for separate from the revenue assigned to county government to be utilized for the benefit of the entire county. Again, we have given that money, assuming, as the bill proposes. There is no talk. Again, we leave it in the wilderness for the county to decide how. Then if you decide to pick a community project, now it doesn't talk or tell us how will that project be identified, how will it be implemented, and how it's going. So we'll just be creating money for people that without any accountability on the usage of the same resource that is meant to benefit the community. Mr. Speaker, the committee noted that the bill is a money bill pursuant to Article 114 of the Constitution, and as such, it can only be introduced in the National Assembly pursuant to Article 109, subclause 5 of the Constitution. Again, and this is something that, Honorable Speaker, we have always heard about when we are doing our budgets whenever it touches on a money bill, and the Katiba says about something that Treasury has to give an input. And on so many amendments here which have come before this House on matters to do with finances, the Speaker has proudly said it is not, I'm sorry, it cannot, because the Constitution does not allow us to be able to proceed with the amendments as indicated, Honourable Speaker. Mr. Speaker, having considered the bill for the foregoing reasons, the committee recommends that the House rejects the bill in its entirety. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I will invite members, Honourable Speaker, as they contribute to this bill, Honourable Speaker, that we take into account a comprehensive report by the Committee on Environment, Forestry and Mining in order for members to make and appreciate the concern and that came out of the public participation. Honourable Speaker, out of the 19 who came before the committee, the stakeholders, government agencies, only 3, I think, or 4, if my memory puts me right, only supported. But all the others said, I think we will not be able to appreciate. My dear sister is asking which one, and because I know I like her. You know, she is one
address the Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Emilio Odhiambo is a seasoned politician, and we appreciate. Among the few, which I will gladly want to, for her concern, is the Samburu Women Trust, who came before our committee, the Council of Governors, I'm saying for those who supported, the Samburu Women Trust, the Council of Governors supported this. There was this other one, sorry, the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. Again, they are the ones who came. The Nature Kenya also kind of was at the middle, supporting and not supporting. But all the others objected to the bill, as I had indicated earlier, Honourable Speaker. So I'm asking my colleagues to appreciate the public participation that my committee did go through, and I want to thank all committee members for the good work and the time that they came. We remember we went out, Honourable Speaker, in some areas where we were able to, because we also wanted to beat the deadline of what, as per our standing order. I want to thank my committee members, of course, gladly, with my Vice Chair, Mheshimiwa Honourable Cameron from Baringo South, and the other 13 members who brought their experiences, brought in their time, and a lot of input and we had a very useful engagement between us and the committee members and the stakeholders who came before us for us to be able to have this conclusion. And our rejection, it is not meant that we don't want money to go to the counties. We are saying, for example, under the Petroleum Act of 2016, there is a revenue sharing formula. Under the Mining Act, there is a revenue sharing formula. Under the what is this? The latest, the climate change thing. So, yes, again, there is a revenue sharing formula under that act. The wildlife, for example, again, it has its, and they have said people have been satisfied with the way the revenue sharing has been going as per the acts, the respective acts as it is. Honourable Chair, I will be asking the members of Parliament to be able to interrogate the committee report and be able to see the richness. And of course, I know members have experiences Carbon credit, for example, Honorable Speaker, Mheshimiwa Roko has a lot of information. In fact, when we were doing that, we gladly got a lot of valuable representation from him on carbon credit, because he's an expert in that. Actually, he's one of the renowned experts in that field. It's only that he makes a lot of money out of that at the same time. And it's because he's reducing, his work is to reduce emission. And Honorable Speaker, for your information, when you use firewood, then you are affecting that atmosphere by releasing carbon. So what Honorable Roko did was, how do I reduce this? So stop the use of firewood, but use these GCOs that conserve. And on that peke yake, I don't want to say how much Honorable Roko makes, but it is a good business. With those few remarks, Honorable Speaker, I beg to move and call upon Honorable Kamuren, the Vice Chair of the committee, to second. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Is it Honorable Kamuren or the Member of Parliament for Nakuru County who is seconding?
Pardon?
Is it Honorable Kamuren or the Member of Parliament for Nakuru County who is seconding?
No, sorry, Honorable Speaker, my apologies. Mheshimiwa Kamuren from Baringo County.
Yes.
Honorable Speaker, is my Vice Chair. I will request him to second.
Is the one seconding?
Yes, Honorable.
Give the mic to Honorable Kamuren.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I stand to second this bill. Honorable Speaker, it's well said by my chair, and he has gone clearly and touched all what we did agree as the committee. We took time over this bill. We gave good time to the public to bring their recommendations, their fears, and they directed us. In conclusion, we did agree that this bill, if it goes forward, it will contradict the present bills that are already being used. So for purposes of harmony and for purposes of running these departments in a very coordinated way, we better keep another opportunity, those who are concerned, to get time to do their homework well, because we have gotten the information. So in conclusion, we did request that let us inform the other members that we reject this bill for the time being, so that in future we can still work on that.
Kamuren,
so I want to...
Honorable Kamuren, order. You cannot make the statement you have made while seconding.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. It is because I wanted to be very specific, but I stand advised. So, Honorable Speaker, I want to second this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Kamuren. Honorable members, I propose the question, the Natural Resources Benefit Sharing Bill, Senate Bill number 6 of 2022, be now read a second time. The Honorable Murugara will speak before the Honorable Lisa Chilule.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think even the mover and the seconders were in a dilemma when it comes to moving a bill for rejection. Ordinarily, when motions are brought, it's supposed to be for support. But here we are in a catch-22 because the bill emanates from another house. And now they have to move the way they are doing it in negative. That notwithstanding, and without casting any aspersions on the House of the Senate, as I'm about to do so by standing order number 87, there are many problems with this bill which necessitate its opposition and a call for its rejection. In fact, to be polite, as they say in English, this bill is a right royal mess emanating from the Senate. You know, in England, the king cannot be wrong, and where he is wrong, they simply say he is right, but it's a mess. I have looked at this bill, and what concerns me most is that the House of Senate and the mover of the bill in that house may have been oblivious of the fact that all the matters that are listed as natural resources are actually governed by different acts of parliament which have different provisions, including sharing of revenue between the national government and the county government. The first natural resource that is listed is actually sunlight. We may have difficulties understanding how we'll be sharing sunlight unless where we are talking about energy generated from solar, and this cuts across counties and it possibly involves the national government. We have surface water and underground water also being shared. And here again, we do have problems with water flowing from one county to another, and there may be need for an agreement on how to share that water, which may actually cause a lot of problems. And there are very many other resources that are actually listed here, without a mention that every natural resource in the country actually has an act of parliament which governs it. And there may be fear and risk of duplicity when it comes to passing a law similar to this one, including when it comes to wildlife resources. We have the Wildlife Act, the Management Act. When it comes to geothermal resources, we do have the Energy Act. We have the Mining Act for minerals, Petroleum Act for petroleum, and all this. There is a possibility that the drafters of this bill were oblivious of these laws, and now that does pose a risk when it comes to enactment of a law such as this one. I've also looked at the format of its drafting, and there are issues regarding this. For example, when it comes to guiding principles of benefit sharing in section 4, subsection B reads that we would have revenue maximization and adequacy. Adequacy is not defined, and adequacy is actually, it cannot be guaranteed. It depends on what we are sharing. Whether it is adequate or inadequate, it is actually shared. We then have a different way of drafting, and that is to be found in section 5, subsection 2, paragraph D. This is where we are forming an authority that is supposed to be governing benefit sharing. And it reads that the authority is capable of doing or performing such other things or acts for the proper performance of its functions under this act, which may be lawfully done or performed by a body corporate. There are issues here. Number one, in the legislative drafting, we cannot talk about such other things. It is such other functions. When it comes to performance in drafting, it is actually discharge of duties. then a question begs as to why we would be saying which may be lawfully done or performed by a body corporate. Body corporates do different things. Why would we import what other body corporates do into a statute like this one? Another problem I was able to pick out are functions of the authority, and I took particularly section 6, subsection 1D. Oversee the administration of funds set aside for community projects to be implemented under a benefit sharing agreement. This is the authority that is overseeing sharing of benefits set aside for a community, which money under this act is to be administered by the county government. How does a national authority oversee what the counties do? There are possibly going to be a conflict here, and unless that is actually resolved, then it's a recipe for intergovernmental conflict. Subsection 2 is even more interesting. It talks about the authority may, in the furtherance of its functions, collaborate with such other bodies or organizations within or outside Kenya as it may consider necessary for the better performance of its functions under the Act. This, in essence, means the authority can actually move to other ministries and seek collaboration with the ministries independently, which may again cause problems. But when it comes to the outside world, outside Kenya, who is this authority that will move to international organizations and seek collaboration without going through the necessary diplomatic channels of the country? And there are many other problems that can be pointed out in this particular act. Then we move to section 7, which now appoints the authority. And this is the most interesting of all the sections. We have a chairperson to be appointed by the president with approval of parliament. The question here is, how can parliament approve appointment to an authority which is not a constitutional authority? Below that, as I summarize, I see my time is up. We even have
Honorable Murugara, if I give you 2 minutes, nobody else would have a chance to speak.
No, we will continue tomorrow. I happily see it is slated. I wish I don't feel.
Honorable Millie Odhiambo and Honorable Lisa Chelule are very anxious to say something before we adjourn. I have 1 minute.
And what is exciting with that is we have the cabinet secretary making some particular appointments of authority members with approval of parliament. And this cannot go any further. There is no way a cabinet secretary can make an appointment and then seek that appointment to be approved by parliament. And here, again, it has to be made clear, parliament here stands for the two houses, the National Assembly and the Senate. Is it both of them to approve, or it's one of them? I would have pointed out so many of what I consider to be inconsistencies with this particular bill, but because time is up, I wish to voice my opposition and urge the House to reject the bill. Thank you very much.
Honorable Millie Grace Odhiambo for House balance.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will start off by thanking the committee for giving the report. And I want to say I'm not very persuaded by the committee on the issue of total rejection. And I would want to look more comprehensively at the report to see, to be persuaded by the committee's stand. However, I actually see a lot of issues that the committee is raising that may call for amendments. I have seen for myself that, for instance, if you look at this, we are talking about natural resource benefit sharing bill. And yet, if you look at the long title, it does not take into account international conventions, because if you are talking about national, resource sharing, then you must actually give reference to international convention. You cannot talk without making reference to biological diversity, and you cannot talk without making reference to the Nagoya Protocol on access to genetic resource and the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits of the same resources. And Mr. Speaker, the issue, what I'm saying actually is, it's just unfortunate that I can't raise all of them here today, but when this bill next comes, I hope I'll get the opportunity to raise the issues. That when you are talking about sharing, benefit sharing of natural resources, there are very serious issues at a national level that we as a country need to address to protect our own natural resources when it is Kenya between other countries. At the national level, there are, of course, definitely different dynamics. So, Mr. Speaker, no, because of time, I would just say that by way of introduction, but I will be looking at specific process of the bill.
Honorable members, order. Honorable members, at the time being 7:00 p.m., this House stands adjourned until Wednesday, the 6th day of March 2024 at 9:30 a.m.